just get it off the, or, you know, it'll just go through with, the change will go through. And
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This is weird.
Oh,
Some of the stuff came out, some of it didn't. It can't be that important, right?
yeah. Did you read this? This is fun. They want beer in their whole building.
Look.
to 7? Is
Yeah, it is.
this clock accurate? Yes, it is. Okay, all right. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
State of, please remain standing.
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and the will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs above all.
Please be seated. Okay, roll call, please.
Thanks, I'm the secretary. Okay, I know Commissioner Wang has left us. Commissioner Jane? Here. Commissioner Chahal? Here. Commissioner Uketsi?
Here.
Commissioner Reinhardt? Here. And Commissioner Kelly? Here. And Mike O'Halloran. And I'm here.
All right. Okay, hearing procedures. Public hearings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the commission directs all activity during the hearings. All comments shall be addressed to the commission. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent hearing. Applicants will be allotted up to 10 minutes to present and justify proposals following staff presentation of the item. Other speakers will be given up to 4 minutes. The applicant is allotted up to 5 minutes for rebuttal of comments. No additional comments will be accepted upon the close of the public hearing, although the commission reserves the right to direct questions to any speaker on any matter. Special procedures and time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Appeal of commission actions must be filed in writing within 7 calendar days. Okay. All right, do we have any continuances and exceptions? Oh, are you, sir, in the back, are you raising your hand? Oh, no, okay. All right, thank you. Consent calendar items.
Okay, there are 3 items on the consent calendar, and the first one is the Planning Commission minutes for September 27th. The second is for a location on San Tomas Expressway, asking for a, this is a use permit, Bon Appetit, and item 5C, consent item IC, is at 3555 Monroe Street, asking for a use permit for a new restaurant there.
Okay.
I would like to pull items A and B, please.
Okay.
And I'd also like to pull item C.
Item C. Okay, then let's just let's go over each item one at a time. Item A, Planning Commission minutes of September 27th, 2017. Commissioner
Okay,
Jane?
so the first thing is for the item of, I'm sorry, the amendment for the massage businesses. I forget which item that is.
The last item.
D, okay. It was approved or recommended to approve for city council, but the votes were not recorded here. So under motion and action, it says the commission motion to recommend that the city council adopt the proposed amendment, but there's no votes. And then the second was just simply a clarification where I reported on my travel to the APA conference, and I said that California ranked 49 out of 50 in terms of housing per capita, and it's listed as housing capita. So it's just simple clarification there.
I remember that the vote was unanimous, right?
It was.
Okay, so can we make an update?
Yes, we'll change the minutes to reflect the vote.
Okay,
That was my
thank
same
you.
note.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So do we need to review it again, or?
No, for something like that, we'll just make those changes and then forward it on to city council.
Okay, thank you. All right, item B.
But you do need to vote.
Make a motion to approve minutes
Oh,
with
that's
those
right.
2 changes.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item B.
Okay, so for this item, I have my standard issue with the conditions, and that is simply that one of the conditions here says, it's condition P8, and it says, "No live entertainment or amplified music will be allowed unless it is wholly incidental to the restaurant use." And being that this is a corporation with no neighbors, essentially, that they should be allowed to have parties in there, like Christmas and holiday parties and whatever they want, with a DJ or a band or whatever. So I don't know why the city insists on having this as the standard condition for approval, but I would personally like to see that one removed for this application, and simply it be changed to a nuisance ordinance, such that if the, the noise exceeds whatever 70 dB outside of the building or 80 dB outside of the building, then, I think it's covered by the standard city noise ordinance. If the noise outside the building is too high, then there would be a fine or.
I'll cover. Commissioner Jane, if I could just explain, I did mention this before at a previous planning commission
Yeah.
meeting, and I apologize, perhaps, folks don't remember. But the reason why we actually enumerate this in the conditions is because there is a specific discretionary approval required for live entertainment. And so unless the applicant actually asks for it, we have to present this exclusion in the conditions because it requires noticing and a specific approval. So,
I recall that. My complaint is that I personally don't believe that city should have the default as a discretionary use permit, because it does, there's very little live entertainment in the city, and most people have to leave the city if they want to have some entertainment.
okay.
So,
So we can, again, as we've done in prior meetings, so the Planning Commission, if this is a recommendation, I would discuss it on your other business, and if you want to make this recommendation to the long-range planning team to include this in the zoning code update, that it would be dealt with comprehensively. And I think that has been noted before.
Right.
But it would be something, if you want to make that motion as a separate request aside from this permit, or you could amend this that if there's a minor, it would be treated as a minor permit if they wanted to amend this. But again, this is a place of business, and this facility is strictly for the business employees of NVIDIA. So it isn't a commercial operation cafe, but I understand your intent overall for other businesses.
I guess I'd like to do both then, is to, when we have a motion, to make this a minor, what's called a minor,
We could have a condition in here to say that in the event that the applicant requests live entertainment, that they could pursue this as a minor amendment
a minor
to
amendment.
the use permit.
Okay, okay.
But the applicant has to ask for it, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay, understand. All right, would the,
I have a question.
let me see. Okay, before we go to your question. So, Commissioner Jane, would you like to add that as an agenda item in the future to discuss, as we did with, for recommending
Yeah, I
zoning
will. We'll
changes?
discuss that later in the meeting.
Okay,
yeah.
so it's not part of the agenda, so if you'd like to propose that, then
Yes, I will.
let's discuss that,
Yeah.
okay? Commissioner O'Halloran.
Okay. I primarily wanted to understand this a little better. In fact, it seems odd that it's a consent item. Is this now a different, this restaurant at NVIDIA, a different item is open to the public, that public can come in? In some ways, the way it's written up, it sounds like it is.
I think the report said it's not going to be open to the public.
Does it say that? Part of the advantages or disadvantages is it meets the need of local customers and draw
Oh, well, yeah,
patrons from a greater region.
right.
So,
Yeah, NVIDIA is unique. They have multiple campuses, and also there are visitors to the facility that would basically visit the restaurant. The facility is secured. When you basically enter the facility, you basically have to check in, but it could be a guest or a visitor, not necessarily an employee, and you would still be able to visit the cafeteria or the cafe there. So the way we wrote it is more open, in essence. The operation could be different. Many of our corporate campuses, I mean, for example, Xerox Park in the past, when I was a little kid, you could basically go to the cafeteria if you just signed in at the main entrance, and you could end up in the cafeteria. And they basically also had full service, as I recall, when I was little. But this particular one, and your particular requirement is meant for people that are inside the building.
so
And
it's
how,
it's not, it just threw me when it said it was to meet the need of, or to draw patrons from a greater region on there. And in fact, one of the later justifications is it will reduce traffic. So I'm not sure how you can draw patrons and
Yeah, we could-
reduce traffic.
I think the intent was that because we have multiple, I mean, we have thousands of employees there, that they would not need to go outside of the campus to get, you know, to have lunch or other food service. So it does help. They do have a TDM program associated with the development, and they're coming
That would
forward.
include this.
Yes, and they're
That would
coming
be part of
forward,
this.
yes, to have facilities on site that would serve the employees,
But
so.
they are attracting people, that will still be part of their
Yes.
calculation.
And their next phase of their development is coming up, and they're actually adding another 300,000 square feet to the, I think, so the building's about 800,000 square feet. That's coming forward as an architectural approval. So it will serve the employees on site.
yeah, and
Again, a better understanding.
if
It
I-
says that it's zone planned development.
Mm-hmm.
Are we changing the zoning?
No.
It does say, actually, the general plan designation was high-intensity office, research and development. It said nothing about a regional mixed use or anything. So it seems like, I mean, we really are changing a PD to another PD.
It does not require that because under the PD, it did allow, it actually incorporated the restaurant use and other amenities for on-site for the employees. So that was already approved.
Okay, I guess that's the clarification I wanted. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, also the general plan for our industrial, where we have our offices and employment areas, actually there's policies that promote these type of amenities, whether they be restaurants or exercise or other amenities to keep people on site. And now we have
But
very,
not necessarily to draw
yeah,
patrons.
but we have very large campuses. And so, for example, NVIDIA, they have Occupy immediately across the expressway, a full campus. They basically have employees coming back and forth. When they basically build the next building, they'll be going back and forth to this facility, and their partners will be also coming. So the reduction statement is still there, but we can,
That just sounds a
Yes.
little odd. Do we collect a sales tax on those sales of beverages?
If they are a point of sale, they would be like any other restaurant, unless the food is offered free. Sometimes it is offered as part of
Okay, but if they have to pay
employee.
for a beer or
if they-
wine,
Yes.
we collect the sales tax.
It
that
would be
goes
the
to
same
city.
as any other restaurant.
Okay, good. Don't mind that.
Okay, Commissioner Reinhardt.
I just wanted to clarify, Commissioner Jane, are you proposing that we, oh, sorry. Is this on? Yeah. Are you proposing that we pull the entire item or just bring up the issue that you're talking about for future use permits? Because I think, I don't want to hold up the applicant.
Oh, no, I wasn't proposing to hold up the applicant.
Okay.
I was proposing a minor amendment to the use permit for this project.
Okay.
And then to put on the agenda for a future meeting, a zoning update.
Perfect. Okay.
So you're actually giving more flexibility to the applicant.
Yes.
and through the chair, We did receive a letter from the applicant, Representative Bon Appetit, in the NVIDIA, and they asked that a condition be amended so that they can basically serve not just within the restaurant area, which is a very small area, but because it is a secured building of a little bit over 400,000 square feet, they want to basically be able to serve within the entire building, whether they're being conference rooms or employees can bring back the food to their desk to consume. And
Okay,
bring a beer to your desk.
okay, to make sure I understand, so this, alcohol permit is for the entire campus, not just the restaurant area?
that's correct.
Okay,
Entire
understand.
building.
Yeah, entire building.
Entire building,
They can't
Inside the
go outside the building with alcohol.
oh, outside the building, but, when they expand, add more buildings, is the permit going to cover the new buildings automatically?
As drafted, it would not.
It would not, just the first building they
Correct.
just completed?
And they're not requesting that at this time.
Okay, I understand. Okay, I think the applicant is trying to speak to us, so would you like to come up and tell us, illuminate us?
Good evening, my name is Steve Rollins, and I'm here on behalf of Bon Appetit, which is the food service provider for the Commision Corporation. Am I on?
No. Push.
All right, am I on? You can push it really hard.
Really hard.
If you see like a red light, there
Oh, up
you
here?
are.
You got it.
It's on.
You're good.
I got it. All righty, thank you. My apologies. Again, my name is Steve Rawlings, and I'm here this evening on behalf of Bon Appetit, which is the food service provider for the NVIDIA Corporation that is going to be operating the food and beverage there at the brand new building there. The NVIDIA has built just an absolutely outstanding building. It's obviously going to continue to win awards for its design and so on and so forth. The introduction or the availability of alcohol there at the premises. It is our intention to have, to your point, multiple corporate functions there, whether it be conferences or seminars or shareholder meetings or things along those lines. So it's important to us that we be able to have the alcohol service throughout the building because there may be an event that's going on up on the second floor or down in the atrium area there. And so that was our only request on the conditions of approval that be amended to allow us in that entire brand new building. We're not proposing to take it outside. That presents some other challenges with ABC. But just within the confines of that particular building, from the first floor up to the third floor, because there's multiple rooms that we might be having events in the future, and it's not going to be necessarily a common event. But that would be the one amendment that we would need is just that there's the understanding that the service could possibly take place on the second floor or the third floor or in a variety of different places there in the building. And so that was our request, and to your point, thank you for pointing that out, because we may need to come back, because I do think that we may end up having some other types of events, and we might want some type of music, so we may revisit that. So with that, I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Do you have a question?
Commissioner O'Halloran?
It's not a real important point, but it does ask for on-site sale and service of beer and wine. Does that mean there will be a tax collected for?
Yes, I mean, sorry about that. You can certainly host there, but there's taxation occurs that happens when you make a purchase from the beverage supplier. So there are taxes that do work their way to Santa Clara. In some of the events, it will be a hosted event, and we won't be necessarily charging for that, but there is still taxation collected on all alcohol transactions.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, motion to close public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Excuse me, Chair, I think you have to ask whether there's anybody from the public who would like to make comment on the item besides the
Oh,
applicant.
yeah, thank you for
I
reminding
thought she
me.
said anyone else. Didn't she say anyone else? Or was she
Well,
talking?
I did, but I was addressing the
Oh, okay.
commission,
My
so
mistake.
thank you for pointing that out. Okay, can we just ignore the motion then?
Well, just why don't you ask if anyone else wants to
Okay,
speak? And
sure.
if not, then we can just
Sure.
proceed.
So would anyone else in the public like to speak? Okay, so no need for rebuttal either. So I guess the motion to close public hearing stands. Thank you. Anybody else would like to make a comment? Okay, I have one quick question. So this permit is for alcohol sales and consumption. If NVIDIA provides free alcohol to guests, that's not, there's no permit required for that, right?
No, they still have ABC license.
Yeah, the ABC has many categories of
Oh.
licenses that are required. Some of the events and functions that are not ran by a provider on site are catered events. There's a
Oh.
catering permit that is required for that. So it could be that, you know, they may have an event inside the building and it's not going to be provided by Bon Appetit, you know, the Endeavor Cafe. It'll be through a separate type of license through ABC.
So the permit is given to
The cafe vendor,
cafe vendor, not to NVIDIA.
it runs with the property.
It
So
runs with
if-
the property.
That's correct. So
And
if
with the vendor too, or?
If the vendor moves to a different building or elsewhere, they would have to basically secure a use permit for that site.
Okay, and
The
if,
use permit would run with this property, and so whether it's NVIDIA or a different business in the future, as long as the business does not cease for more than a year, then it basically would continue on.
and if NVIDIA chooses another caterer, then the permit automatically transfers to that caterer?
That's correct.
Okay,
It doesn't automatically transfer. You know, it depends on who secures the ABC license. If it is an independent contractor, if it's an independent contractor, then that person or entity has the right to sell the license, but they can still secure another one because there is an effective use permit.
okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, any motion?
So I would like to move that we approve the use permit for serving alcohol at the campus with the provision that live music and amplified music be allowed with
As a minor amendment to the use
a
permit.
minor amendment to the use permit.
Any seconds?
Second.
Okay, any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All right.
Okay, so that action is final unless there's an appeal to the office of the city clerk, but that's done through the planning department within 7 calendar days.
Okay, thank you. The applicant has a question?
It can go up to all floors.
I'm sorry, I was hoping that we would get an amendment to P7, and I didn't hear that in the motion, and I don't know if that was an oversight, but I would ask, if it was, if I'd ask for reconsideration.
It was an oversight. Okay. Can I restate the motion?
So you're going to first move to rescind your prior
Okay.
motion,
Okay. I move to rescind my prior motion.
and then And a
Did you
vote?
second? Were you the person on the record as a second?
it doesn't matter. Anyone can
doesn't matter?
second the
Okay.
motion to rescind.
All right.
Okay.
And we need all in favor.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion is rescinded. And now you
Okay.
can state your new motion.
I move to approve the sale of alcohol, of beer and wine at the premises with the following condition: that alcohol be extended to the entire building interior, and that, that the restriction on live and amplified music be able to be amended with a minor amendment.
Okay, any seconds?
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion
Aye.
carries. Thank you. All right, next item. Which is the alcohol permit for the Monroe Street property. Let's see, Commissioner O'Halloran
Yes.
wanted to pull this item?
I just would like a clarification. Is this restaurant itself already approved, perhaps as part of a larger submission?
Yes, there is a list of retail uses that are allowed, and so this is a permitted use within the PD.
So the restaurant's there, or?
Yes,
will
is
soon be
an
there,
allowed
and-
use, and then only the use permit for the beer and wine license is a separate approval.
Okay, that's the clarification I was looking for. Thanks.
And are the hours the same as other properties where, I mean, other restaurants on the same property?
There's no, they're proposed by each individual applicant. And so, and that with the service of beer and wine, you can regulate those hours.
Oh, okay.
But in this particular case, on a recent planning commission use permit for Yellow Chili, which is a
Yeah.
adjacent tenant,
Right.
the hours are consistent with that adjacent business.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Any motion?
I would like to make a motion to approve the recommendation.
Okay, any seconds?
Second.
Any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, let's go to the hearing
That
item.
motion passes again and is
Oh,
final
thank
unless
you.
there's an appeal within 7 days.
Thank you. All right, item 6A.
Item 6A is for the property at 167 Cronin Drive, which is to approve an existing unpermitted 335 square foot detached accessory building that has a 3-foot rear yard setback where 5 is required, and a height that is over the 12-foot maximum allowed.
Okay, thank you. Chair Ikeze and members of the commission, the applicant is requesting a variance. The property is located at 167 Cronin Drive. And as you see, there's a photograph of the building here. It consists of an angular building that really mimics the property corners and is located in the rear half of the lot. And it was constructed without permits, and its current placement, which is not on a foundation, is actually set at 3 feet, whereas the requirement for a rear yard setback is 5 feet. So again, the construction was referred to us via complaint process, and because of that, the city investigated that and concluded that the building itself needed a building permit. It exceeds the size limitation that is allowed without a building permit, plus the height. So the request, again, is for the substandard setback of 3 feet versus 5 that's required, and also a modification, which is for the height of the building, which is at a little over 14 feet. This is the property, and you see the aerial view of the structure in the rear part of the property behind the main house. And the building consists of both the studio and an attached deck. There's about a 13-foot separation to the main house. And the findings that we're required to make under the ordinance as it currently stands is that there is a substantial or unusual consideration regarding the property that basically prevents the applicant or the property owner from building according to the setback. In this case, it's really a justification after the fact to try to make the findings of the variance. And the staff found that there was no unusual conditions. The property is actually larger than most. It's close to 7,000 square feet. It is possible to make the required setback location, and there's no existing foundation associated with it. It could be modified to meet the code requirements, and there are other properties in similar situations that would be restricted on the same code requirements. So therefore, the staff is unable to make the findings, and so for that reason, we are recommending denial because we're unable to make those findings for the reduction in the setback based upon the findings for a variance. So we do have a resolution enumerating, again, the arguments that this is essentially a preference versus a code situation or irregularity related to the land or the building. And for that reason, are recommending denial of the variance. And I'll conclude and answer any questions you have at this point.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner O'Halloran.
I just want for a public record to say I asked and was invited to take a look at the building in the backyard. Thank you for the invitation or the allowance.
Commissioner Kelly.
You said there was a complaint. Was it one of the neighbors that complained about it?
Just for the record, any complaints that the city receives are treated as anonymous, and so the identity and location of the complaint is protected. So we don't reveal that even during the variance process.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Chahal.
I have a clarification on applicant's letter, point number 10, which says something like conflicting guidance in publications. Can you explain that a little bit?
I can take it if you'd like.
Okay.
I was curious about that one myself, and so I did a fair amount of research on it. As the applicant points out, there is something called the Citizen's Guide for Single-Family Additions. It's a document that looks like this. And sure enough, on one of the pages of this document is something that says accessory buildings require at least a 5-foot side and/or rear yard. If the accessory building is 60 feet or more from the street property line, that yard may be less than 5 feet. However, if the building is 3 feet or closer to the property line, a 1-hour firewall is required. So I was very surprised to see this document myself because I didn't know it existed, and I certainly didn't know about this provision. But as you heard, the wording is not great. It says a 5-foot side or rear yard, and then it says if it's more than 60 feet from the property line, that yard can be less than 5 feet. So the side or the rear? So, of course, the question is, what does the code say? In fact, right in the document, it says, please refer to Articles 5 and 6 of the zoning ordinance for the full text and exact wording. That's the first clue that something's wrong because Articles 5 and 6 of the zoning ordinance haven't existed since the 90s when the entire zoning ordinance was renumbered and we now have titles and chapters, not articles. That being said, this document does have the current zoning ordinance attached, including the accessory building chapter, which contains no provision about being closer than 60 feet to the street property line. But I did find out the history of this. In 1969, when the zoning ordinance was adopted, there was a provision that said if you are more than 60 feet from the property line, then your side yard can be less than 5 feet. Rear yards have always had to be at least 5 feet, but there was a provision that said the side yard can be less than 5 feet. Problem was, at some point, the building code started requiring that all buildings have 3 feet between them. So we had this zoning code provision that let people have 0 lot lines, but then a building code provision that said you had to have at least 3 feet, so you'd be violating the building code if you complied with the zoning code. So in the early 1980s, that provision was struck from the zoning ordinance. So the side yards, as of the early 1980s, had to have 5 feet. And again, the rear yards always had to have 5 feet. This document was prepared in the early 1980s by a planning intern named Kevin Riley. And I'm assuming he was going off the pre-revision version when he wrote this somewhat confusing line about side and rear yards. So anyway, that's a relic from the 1969 zoning ordinance. Again, even the 1969 zoning ordinance did not allow for less than 5 feet rear yard setbacks. We've always required that. It's regrettable that there's this confusing line, and we're obviously going to get rid of it, but the fact that there's an old document with a confusing line doesn't absolve you from complying with the current law, especially when the current law is attached to the document.
So we will change these guidelines?
I would strongly recommend that, yes.
Excuse
So that
me.
no more confusion in the future.
Chair Kays, I wanted to bring something up because of that reference also. When the city adopted the single-family residential design guidelines, there was a specific notation that that guideline was no longer valid. So it should not be used as a reference, and it was all the copies, as far as I know, were removed from our office. Secondly, the structure was built in 2015. Our guidelines were adopted in 2016. So because he was using that as a reference when he constructed the building without permits, the reference now is no longer valid. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Halloran?
In the document, it's talking about easement encroachment that was approved by Silicon Valley Power, AT&T, and PG&E. It does say on the AT&T approval letter that there is a reservation for an attached document. But I don't see the attached document, so I don't know what that is.
I'll just say, and just generally speaking, when a building is built within a reservation or an easement that a public utility has, they have to obtain an encroachment agreement. So basically, there's usually a disclaimer that says, in the event that they need to access the lines in this thing, the building is in the way. If it references underground, it means you'd have to move your building at your own expense, or if it's overhead, they'd have to get in there and access the lines. But they usually say that they basically don't hold any financial, they want to be held harmless for financial implications if they were to access it and damage the building. Normally, it's something like that. So it would be any conditions listed on the encroachment permit.
So they're not objecting to the encroachment, they're just kind of
Well,
covering
they are, but
other issues.
but AT&T is saying they're willing to grant an encroachment permit with the proviso that in the event they need to access the lines, whatever they need to do to get to them would have to take place.
Just trying to.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions?
I did have another question.
Yes.
And this is maybe an applicant's question where they talked about prior permit requiring upgrades that they did. And in the background report, it says there hasn't been any building permit requested since 1960. So I'm just trying to clarify that, again, discrepancy.
Okay, so there were minor permits. There was a skylight permit in 1986, a kitchen remodel in 2005, re-roof in 2009, and then there was another correction notice for upgrading the electrical panel without a building permit in 2010. So that correction notice was issued to the same property owner, and the permit was granted after it was installed.
Those things are on
Yes.
the record. I just wanted
Yes.
to confirm. I think that's all for right now.
Okay, thank you. Would the applicant like to come up and speak?
Testing, is that good? Let me have a moment. Oh, I guess I should wait until my slides are queued up. Let's see. Oh. Oh. Yes, that's it. So thank you, Chair Ikezi and commission members. I'm David Martin. My wife Barbara is also here. We've been at 167 Cronin for over 22 years. We expect to remain there throughout our retirement years. So here again is our backyard. At the bottom of the screen is the back of our house. The top of the screen is the rear fence. And of course, as you can see, this is the main structure and the deck, which was already mentioned. First, I just want to clarify the two requests that we have. Oh, sorry, wrong way. So regarding the variance for the rear setback, the structure encroaches in this strip represented by the green rectangle, which is 2 feet wide and about 22.5 feet in length. Regarding the height, the excessive height over 12 feet, that only involves a smallish portion of the roof, which is represented approximately by the yellow triangle. So because that's a minor modification, I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation addressing the rear setback issue. In our justification letter, we have presented 11 points in support of the variance request. And the bulk of this presentation will simply be highlighting several of those, with particularly focusing on the reasons for the structure's location and undue hardship associated with reconstructing or moving the structure. Initially, I'll start with a brief description of the structure, and at the end, I'll show how our 11 points can be mapped onto the required variance findings, and then a few remarks about the status of our project. So the structure is considerably more than just a utilitarian accessory building. It's been a labor of love for Barbara, who designed it with great care. And she was completely engaged in selecting all the materials and completely engaged in each day of the construction process. She intends to continue with her artistic activities throughout the remainder of retirement, and the purpose of the structure is to provide a place, a long desired space for her to do that, to enjoy those activities. So I have 4 photos. You've already seen this one. It's a similar angle in the evening. This is a photo of the interior. And of course, the structure includes both a workspace, which you can see here, and considerable storage space, which she needs for supplies and equipment. And this is a photo looking outward into the backyard. So I should also mention all aspects of the structure involve highest quality construction by licensed contractors. There's no water, gas, heating, or plumbing, and it will never be used for residential purposes. Now, getting into our points in support of the variance. So our central points have to do, with, as I said, with the placement of the structure being essential to making good use of our backyard space, and then also prohibitive cost of rebuilding or moving. So given the yard size and the size requirements for the structure itself, we've found that if we had to move the structure any further in, it would create a severe constraints on what we can do with many areas of the backyard. I don't have time to go into detail, but in particular, this area over here, even by moving the structure a couple more feet inward, this area would be effectively blocked in many ways in terms of visibility, in terms of the plants or objects that could be there, in terms of access and walkways that we would like to put into this area. So I should mention the yellow rectangle here represents concrete pavement, and this red rectangle represents a small garden plot surrounded by a low brick wall. So as I said, in the interest of time, I can't go into details about the landscaping constraints, but just that main point that narrowing this distance here from 6 feet to 4 feet already makes it a great deal more difficult to have some acceptable landscaping options. So moving on from that to the considerations of having to rebuild or move. So we have investigated quite thoroughly, we have investigated what might be involved in rebuilding or moving. It's not at all trivial given the way that the structure is founded. And by the way, there is an adequate foundation, which I will come back to near the end of the presentation. But it would require specialist services and a new foundation at a cost of $8,000 or more. And even if we did manage to raise that amount, then of course we'd be confronted with the limitations that the move would impose on landscaping options. Rebuilding, we estimate, would cost around $30,000. So far, the structure has, we've invested around $50,000 in the structure, which was received from an inheritance from Barbara's mother, and that amount has already been depleted. The third bullet here is simply that we've also, with help from David Herzl Building Design, We've considered whether there's any simple modification to remove a couple of feet from the backside. And the structural design precludes any simple types of modification. So other points that are mentioned in the statement of justification. So naturally, we'd like to avoid any risk or stress to the structure that might be involved in a moving operation. In terms of visibility from neighboring yards, we have, it was already designed with that in mind. It has an attractive shingle roof with a steep slope so that there's minimal visibility from neighbors' backyards, no visibility from the street. And in support of these claims, we do have letters of support from 3 neighbors. As was mentioned, we already have easement encroachment approvals. I think it's also in the statement of justification that we've noted similar structures with setback issues in the neighborhood. And these final 2 points were not to, of course, question the code that we're subject to, but simply to point out that the placement of the structure could be regarded as reasonable and not unusual based on the conflicting guidance that was already discussed. And thank you for that. And also the fact that at least 2 neighboring cities would allow a 3-foot rear setback in our situation. Also in the statement of justification, we show a mapping. We're aware, of course, that the variance findings are required under these 4 categories, and we believe that our 11 points do provide support for these, and we provide a mapping of which points provide support for which of the types of findings are needed here. 2 more slides. So first, we acknowledge and regret that our contractor didn't follow proper permitting process, and we didn't have enough knowledge to get that started at the proper time ourselves. But nevertheless, we believe that at the same time, our variance justifications are still valid. We've already paid quite dearly for these mistakes in a number of ways, including quite a bit of fees and fines, having to put our landscaping and other plans on hold for quite a while, and emotional distress that Barbara has suffered. And the contractor was also fined and sanctioned. Finally, as I mentioned, we've also already completed a very high quality of construction. It was carefully documented from the outset with photos by Barbara. We obtained a letter from a structural engineer who examined the structure and found that there were no structural issues requiring remediation. And there is the claim in the staff report that the building does not have a proper foundation is simply inaccurate. And I can come back to that in the question and answer period. So if the variance is approved, we're ready to move forward quickly with the help from David Herzl Building Design to address any remaining issues, provide more detailed drawings and so forth. So in summary, as I mentioned, we provide 11 points of support for the variance request, and we particularly request attention. Can I finish my sentence?
Please.
Thank you. We particularly request attention to the reasons that I've mentioned why the structure needs to be where it is, given the modest size of the backyard and the structure, the size requirements of the structure itself, the prohibitive costs of rebuilding or moving the structure, also the fact that the design precludes any simple modifications, the support that we've gotten from several neighbors. And my final point is a completely extra legal point, but I'd like to mention that because of the emotional significance for Barbara of the structure, she's been on a real emotional roller coaster for some time over this, and it would be a great benefit to us if we could resolve this right away in the affirmative and then move on to the next stage of the permitting process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin.
Allow me to grab my water, excuse me.
Yeah, please. Okay, so let's move on to the questions. Commissioner Kelly.
Okay, and if staff has some comments, feel free to chime in. My concern is that there was a complaint. I'm glad you have The neighbor's on board.
Thank you.
The article that you referenced did reference fire-rated materials. Obviously, we have a 5-foot setback to prevent fires between neighboring properties. So that's a concern. And then the foundation, is one thing that was notated, but I would assume staff would require a full inspection of the unit, maybe open up the walls to issue a permit on it, correct? Okay. So I'm inclined to overlook the mistake, since you got the neighbor and you got the utilities to okay it. But if the utilities ever have to get back there, they're within their rights to rip off part of the structure if they have to access it. And the reason we give them 5 feet for the easement is so they don't have to do it. Now, when I put my gas line in and I put a driveway over it, I knew that if the PG&E ever had to get to the gas line, they're within their rights to jackhammer my driveway, and it would be my responsibility to patch it up. So if it comes down to it, that the foundation is not acceptable to meet current standards, you're okay with the city requiring that you move the structure?
Well, of course, whatever would have to be done to meet code requirements. Of course, if there's a foundational issue that has to be repaired, it doesn't necessarily imply moving the structure.
It's more likely it's the quality of the concrete, the amount of rebar in it, the thickness of the concrete, all those things are what the city looks at when they do it. A structural engineer, I guess, would be the ones that come up with the calculations, says what kind of foundation needs to be there. So I'm inclined, based on what you said, based on the neighbors and based on the utility companies, but you still may have to, after all said and done, is open up the walls, may have to use fire-rated material for the back wall,
Yes.
and the city may require inspection of the foundation. If it's substandard, that means you're going to have to jack up the structure and re-pour the foundation. And if you're going to do that, I would say you should move it forward 2 feet, or at least a foot to allow reasonable access for the utility companies. So.
Yes, sir, I understand all of those points. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, that's my only comments. Thank you.
Commissioner O'Halloran.
Yes, I want to say my immediate reaction would be to deny this based on the comment about approving this would encourage other people not to go through a permit process on there. I just think it's very attractive, and I agree with your neighbors that it adds something special to the neighborhood. And also moving it forward doesn't make sense in terms of your design for the backyard. What I am, like I said, my immediate concern is that we're setting any sort of precedent. So I'd want to make sure that, first off, that he would be paying the same fee if he had, as he would if he had actually gone through the permit, and that there are penalties involved. And I'd like to know a little bit more about those. You mentioned that there were fines and fees, and I'm not sure about sanctions, even, not only on you, but also on the contractor. I'd like to know a little bit about those, because I think those could overcome a little bit of my concern about setting some sort of precedence that would encourage people to do what you did.
Of course. Well, should I go ahead and address that? So we had a $500 fine last year in connection with the variance process. I think that was primarily focused on the fact that it had it was not moving along, appeared not to be moving along rapidly enough. Of course, there were many reasons for that. And it's my understanding that we paid $1,300 to apply for the variance itself. And as far as the fine for the contractor, I'm not sure how much that was, but I think it was significant. And he was sanctioned in the sense that I got a black mark on his license that's viewable on a public website.
Can the staff speak to any of that in terms of the fees that were paid for the permit, penalties? And
There haven't been any fees paid for the permit because one hasn't been obtained yet. The process is first that because the building doesn't meet the setback requirements, we can't issue a permit unless there is a action by the Planning Commission, or in whatever happens here, if that action is
If they
appealed.
go forward, would they be charged those permits that they should have been charged? to
Yes,
begin
they'll
with?
have to go through and pay and the permit fees are twice the valuation of whatever the original permit would have been. So whatever, the value is 50,000, and that's determined to be appropriate by the building department, then whatever the fee is, it's a percentage of the value, then they would be charged twice because they constructed the building without a permit.
Because there is a significant penalty for
Well,
having avoided, having not gone through the permit.
It's just
to begin with.
twice the building permit, so I don't know what that is. It might be $1,200, it might, and so it'd be twice that. I'm not sure what the value.
Concern is people not following, like you said, or Steve Lee said, that it encourages people to avoid permit, build it, and then wait for the city to come by and complain.
Yes.
Also, to the chair, in addition to the building permit, when you deal with utility easements, there's an application that is applied to the Public Works Department that is processed for council consideration. They typically have to enter into an agreement that basically says if the utilities have to get in there, including the city utilities, they basically are not going to be, liable for any of the damage and everything else, and not to basically have to repair any.
That's beyond the letters that we got from the utilities.
Well, no, there's only a PG&E easement. There's not any other, so there's not any city encroachment involved.
Yeah, when a
Sorry, go ahead.
Please.
No, I was just saying in general, when we basically have a general public utility easement or electrical easement where the city's involved, in this case, our Development Review Officer, Gloria, noted that it is a PG&E easement. And so it might not be a general purpose or a public utility easement. In that sense, it's a PG&E easement.
But
And that
there will
doesn't
be, and
necessarily come to the city.
There would have been, and there will be if it gets approved, an application fee to the Public Works Department?
No, to PG&E in this case. Sorry about miscommunication on that part. But in general, for all other considerations for
I
this.
just want to make sure that they are paying not only what they would have had to pay if they had gone through the permit process, just like anybody else. Also want to make sure that there's a penalty for not having done it the first time around.
Well, there's no other penalties. There was a fine because there was not responsiveness to the code violation of constructing the building without permits, and then the setback violation. And there was a substantial lapse of time in between that. But there's no other penalties other than the building permit doubling and being assessed twice the value of a normal building permit, whatever. And like I said, I don't know what the value is for the building permit itself, but it would be twice that. So it could be a few $100s, it could be a couple $1,000s.
It is not so much a slap them on the hands, but they've obviously, the city has now incurred the cost of going through all this process.
Right, we've had several inspections.
Cost the city to
Right,
have
and then
gone
those,
through
yes,
it again.
yes.
And so I not only want to cover that cost, but I definitely want to do something to discourage people from not going through, not seeking what the permit requirements are, and if purposely or not avoiding the permit process.
Well, we don't have any other penalties other than the administrative fines that Mr. Martin mentioned, and that was, but if there's a subsequent application and they're dealing with it, then it's every 6 months, it's automatically, there's a fine. And so in between that time, if they're making an application and working earnestly on it, those fines are withheld. So there's only, at this point, there's only one administrative fine, and then again, the building valuation, but there will be no other assessments for constructing the building without permits. And the only other alternative is that there's a denial of the variance. So,
May I add a comment to that? Just in regards to fees that are created disincentive. It is true, I don't remember the amount, but there's a significant fee for the easement encroachment to be granted by the utilities.
So you've already paid?
Well, actually, the payment is on hold until this stage of the process gets resolved. At that point, then we will certainly need to pay these.
okay, but I want to point out, that's not a penalty. That's an encroachment permit fee, and that's applied for anybody if they want to build within a setback, excuse me, an easement
So again,
that's
that would not have
recorded against the
discouraged somebody
property.
from voiding it, because
Yeah,
they would have had to do that no matter
they've
what.
had, they would have
either
to
way.
pay that regardless.
Okay, Commissioner Chahal?
So I have a question. You mentioned the support from the neighbors. So I see two letters from the neighbors, one immediately back and one in the front, right?
One across the street in the front.
Across the street.
And two of them are backyard neighbors.
Backyard neighbors. So I don't see letters from your immediate neighbor, 177 Cronin.
That's correct. I spoke to the occupant there, and he said he preferred not to provide a letter because he's a renter, and that it would be more appropriate for the owner of the property to provide such a letter. But it's quite difficult to get in touch with the owner who lives overseas. And so we did not get around to trying to make that connection.
And then diagonally backside, where the corner of your, this structure is, that's 172 Bryan. Did you try to contact them?
No, I'm sorry to say we didn't. I think that's because we simply didn't see any conceivable visibility issue from there, from that direction, but I acknowledge that we should have done that. I have no indication that they would have had any concern about this.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Jane?
Mr. Martin, you had briefly alluded to the foundation and then said you would come back to it if you had time. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Right, well, near the beginning of the staff report, it mentioned something about founded on gravel and wood blocks, but that's completely mischaracterization. There are actually 15 substantial concrete piers, and there are wooden supports, wooden blocks, of course, that are attached with metal brackets into those piers. And the reason I say that, well, one other reason why I claim this is a complete mischaracterization is because no one from the city actually inspected the foundation, and also because David Herzl, building design, David Herzl himself gave me the opinion that it seemed perfectly adequate to him. And we also had a structural engineer who specifically looked at the foundation, among other things. And I believe you have a copy of the brief letter that he provided that says he did not see any structural issues requiring remediation.
So you're saying that it's not on a poured concrete flat foundation, it's
That's
on
correct.
piers, which would make it easier to move than if it were on a poured concrete foundation.
I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but I know we had a big, long discussion with an excellent firm that specializes both in house moving and foundations, and they convinced me it was quite an involved operation, and it would cost, just the moving aspect would cost at least $8,000. I have their estimate here, of course, if that would be helpful.
That's okay. And then, and this is partly for staff, we have these fires, these raging fires in Northern California, and it seems to me that we have these codes to prevent fires from leaping from building to building. And I guess I'm wondering, were we to approve this variance, could we put a condition in to require a firewall? Is that something that we could do?
There's no need to because you literally just say comply with, the current building code, because anything within 3 feet requires a 1-hour fire-rated wall, and there cannot be any opening, so you can't have windows or anything to that within 5 feet of a property line. So anything like that would have to be changed.
Okay, I see.
But I'm sorry, just to interrupt, are you talking about the fence behind the building?
It would be the property line. Now, sometimes the fences are on the property
There
line,
is
other
some space
times,
behind the building.
yeah.
So you could say, build a stone wall. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, the fire rating relates to the structure itself, since that would be the combustion source. So as Commissioner Jane was mentioning, so that back wall would have to be 1 hour. Anything within 5 feet would have to be 1 hour rated.
May I comment also? We're aware of that issue, and we've, as I mentioned, we've been working with David Herzl, who is here, to prepare to address that particular concern as soon as we get past this step.
And then finally, can you, I'm not really aware of how this works. Can you explain to me how it transpired that you hired a licensed contractor who didn't ask for permits and then somehow ended up having to get fined or sanctioned because he didn't do that basic level of diligence?
So neither you or the contractor had any discussions with the planning department or the community development department?
I'm sorry to say that's correct. The sequence of events evolved. We weren't clear initially the size of the structure or the location. Barbara had a general sketch in mind. And we had a few contractors over who spoke to us, and we got the general impression that obviously if the structure were small enough, there wouldn't be any need for licensing and permitting, and even if it were needed to be permitted, we got a couple, or at least one opinion that said 3 feet on each side would be adequate. Obviously, we should have investigated. But then when we hooked up with our primary contractor, he's more of a craftsman, I guess, than a contractor who supervises large projects. But he is a licensed contractor, but I guess he was willing to get started and work through all the details with Barbara kind of on an incremental basis. So because of the sort of incremental brainstorming approach that occurred between Barbara and Charlie, I guess there was not, they didn't feel a need to proceed to plans and designs right away. It was an evolving vision. I know that's not much help.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, motion to close public hearing?
No.
Oh, that's right, the public. Does anyone from the public like to speak to this matter? Okay, please come up. Okay, we have somebody else who'd like to speak, so
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Mr. Martin, if you could step down and.
My name is David Herzl. I'm a building designer. I did the as-built drawings of the building that were submitted relative to this variance proceedings here. And I just wanted to clarify two of the points that are issues that have been raised. One is the 1 hour firewall construction. And that's a matter of assuming that it achieves, a variance is granted, it'll go to the building department. There'll be a thorough plan check. The plans will have more detail as to the construction. And that will include how the back walls up towards the fence in the corner will be rebuilt or re-sided to make that 1 hour construction. And the building department is not going to grant a permit, and fire's not going to approve it until that's been demonstrated in the submitted plans. So that's point the first. And point the second is the
It's got sort of a unique way of being anchored to the ground. And what the builder did was he dug like square holes about a foot by a foot, I'm not sure exactly now, about a foot deep into the ground. And these are at the corners of the buildings in various places within the perimeter of the building. And on top of those, they stick up about 6 inches off the ground. And on top of those, cast in our building hardware, and then the 4x6 pressure treat lumber is anchored to that. So the way that, and the clearance to the ground, which is gravel, you poured gravel underneath, so it's very firmly anchored to the ground, and it is there's plenty of adequate bearing pressure, and the number of footings is right there, so that's not an issue. And pressure treat lumber close to the ground, so that's not really an issue. But it's not like other more conventional kinds of constructions that you might have in mind, like, oh, if it's just on piers, can't we move it? The foundation, the way that it's anchored and the way those piers are cast into the ground is really kind of prohibitive to like lifting it and getting it out. So I wanted to clarify those two issues about the foundation, which is, at least in my brief consideration right here, entirely adequate to support the building. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to understand how this thing is anchored. Why can you not just unscrew the building from the foundation and then lift it up and move it over and build additional piers?
If you imagine that this is the level of the ground right here,
Yeah.
the piers stick up about this high.
Okay.
And on the top of those piers is the building hardware that's anchored, that's a part of those piers, cast into those piers, and then the 4x6s are nailed into those, and then the building was built on top. So there's literally no clearance between, there's only about 6 inches of clearance, or possibly less, between the ground and where the 4x6s are, so you can't physically get underneath of it.
So it's an access issue.
Right, right.
You can take the floor out and then access the piers?
Well, all things are doable, and depending on how much money and how much effort you take, but it would mean taking up the entire floor and exposing the entire inside of the building to the ground in order to do that, which would be a cost prohibitive kind of thing to do.
Are the anchors only at the perimeters of the building, or?
No, that's kind of the thing, is they're within the building.
Oh.
So the building is sort of L-shaped like this, and it's got corners here and corners here and corners here, but it's also got inside where the 4x6 floor joists, they're like 4x6s, like 4 feet on center. And where they cross, it's within the building right there, where there's, you can't get under to get in, to get under and undo where the connections are to the piers that are under there.
Oh, this is very unfortunate. Okay, thank you. Anybody else has a question? Okay. Would the applicant like to speak more? You have an opportunity to rebut.
Thank you, I have nothing more at this point.
Okay, thank you. All right, motion to close public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all right, discussions. Okay, Commissioner Chahal.
Okay, so I think this is a code enforcement complaint, and with all due respect, like applicant has done a lot of work on that. He got the letters from PG&E, AT&T, Silicon Valley Power, and other stuff. Construction is good. But my only problem is if we permit this thing, like we are trying to permit, encourage something like non-permitting constructions. And I was hoping that he has all the letters from all the neighbors. I'm not sure which neighbor complained. And that's my issue, like if it is anonymous and maybe the neighbor is the next door neighbor or the diagonally opposite neighbor. And if we don't listen to our residents for these complaints, I think we set a wrong precedent. And so as much as have full sympathy with the applicant for doing a good construction job, but I think he lapsed on part of not following the procedure over there. And on top of that, there's a complaint on that. Those are a couple of my points on those.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Halloran.
It's really a question for staff. Is there any penalty that we could impose beyond what is just there? My biggest concern is I appreciate the idea that I don't want to be stonewalled into just a very non-creative building situation here. I don't, I mean, people need to obey the codes. They need to not look for San Jose or look to Palo Alto for their codes, but they need to look to Santa Clara. And so obviously this should have gone through that type of diligence. But is there any penalty that we can charge beyond this?
We're constrained.
That's the biggest thing, is not encouraging people to avoid.
Let me understand what you're trying to say. You're saying that if we were to give a variance, if we were to give variance, permit a variance, could there be additional penalties?
Correct.
In lieu, with the variance is what you're saying, what you're asking. Okay, thank you.
We're constrained by our administrative penalty schedule. What Ms. Shara described earlier is what we're limited to. They did pay the $500 fine before. They would pay double for their building permits.
But obviously, the city is incurring costs to go through this process.
Yes, but they paid the variance application cost of $1,300 to come here.
Okay, Commissioner Kelly.
Okay. As far as penalties, obviously double the permit fee, and having to come here is not a cheap process. I know since I went through this process for my own accessory unit. So my main concern is impact of the neighbors and fire safety. The neighbors in the rear would be the ones that are mainly impacted. We would let them have the structure anyways because their lot's large enough. Staff, if we approve it, would require a 1-hour firewall in the rear, and the unit is going to have to be opened up, probably open up at least one of the walls. They're going to inspect the foundation, and if it's not acceptable, they are going to be required to meet our standards for a suitable foundation. So I'm inclined to improve it because I also wanted to let residents out there know that actually watch us. I know there's probably very few, but for the ones that watch us, we will try to work with you. But please, if you're planning a project, go to an architect or home designer, submit your application to the planning department, because as you go through the process, you'll get a better product, and it'll, in the end, cost you less money in the long run. So I think we should approve it because all the utility companies have already said they'll approve it. And I do have one question for staff. Is there something that they're going to get from us, or is it just from the utility companies that says that if the utility companies have to access the rear portion behind the structure, that they're responsible for the damage if they have to access it for like any of the utility lines?
I think the language is just similar to what we have, is just a generic language that just says that they have to allow access, per the original easement, which means you have to do it in a reasonable time frame. But also if there's any, overriding situation to where
Like a
they
dowel in a
can't,
power line or something?
yeah, like they, and that damaged it within that they would be not responsive. not responsible for any damage in excess of what normally accessing the pole or whatever, or a transformer, whatever is near them.
Okay. So they would get something to that effect from the city?
No, not from the city.
From the utility companies?
From AT&T. There's
Valley
only,
Power.
there's only an AT&T, I'm sorry, there's a PG&E. So there's probably either gas line or something there that they would have to agree to, or they would, say if it's underground, then they would not put the dirt back, or at least they'd throw it back, and they're not going to landscape back there or replace decorative pavement or anything like that. They just put in standard material, whatever
But
it
if they
is.
have to dig it up, they may have to physically knock a portion of the structure out of the way to dig the trench.
It depends on what kind of equipment they use. There's different types involved. I mean, I think most utility companies try to be as helpful as possible when they issue an encroachment permit. There's different types of equipment, such as jack and
can use.
boring, rather than an open trench and using, like like an excavator of some sort. But, and so it may not be necessary, but if they have to hand dig versus some equipment they need to get in there, they're going to go with whatever is the most convenient for them.
And will a condition of our permit be that they get a formal,
Yes,
I
an
guess,
encroachment permit.
encroachment permit from the utility companies?
Yes, we would have to have that. So because we again grant that courtesy to other public utilities, we would wait for that and not issue the permit until we received the actual signed encroachment permit.
Okay, all right. And with that, I would be okay with issuing it. But I would tell you, you're very lucky, because if your neighbors didn't support this, it probably wouldn't be going through, at least with me. That's all I have to say.
I understand, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Jane.
It seems to me, I do appreciate all the work you did with getting your neighbor's approval, but it seems to me if moving it is $8,000 and you have to pay these filings for the encroachment permit and you have to pay for the firewall, it's almost not really going to be that much different between moving it and doing all of these other things. So that's my perspective.
If you'd like to comment, please go ahead.
Well, of course, there is still a significant difference, given that my understanding, I'm certain it's 8,000 is the minimum that this would amount to. But the other point is that even if we raise the 8,000 and move the structure, we're still between a rock and a hard place, so to speak, with respect to not having a satisfactory landscaping options in a significant portion of the yard.
Commissioner Halloran.
I wanted to say that part of my reasoning that I would vote to approve the variance is that it is obviously not a habitable building. It's as much an enclosed patio as anything else, and so I don't see as much of an intrusion. Very reluctant to override a denial because of the code violations, not pursuing the permit, but that's a lot of my reason why I would vote to approve the variance. Thank you.
I feel very, I'm very struggling. I think I don't have an issue giving a variance on the height, because as the applicant said, it's only in the small part of the the structure, and it's not like the building is over the height limit throughout the entire floor space. But that setback issue, I'm struggling to overcome the issue I have with the code violation. And to, so my inclination is to accept the variance on the height, but not on the rear setback, and to ask the applicant to move the structure. Okay, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Yeah, I just think that this is clearly in violation of our rules, and if we go down this path and approve people whenever they come asking for forgiveness, it's just setting a poor precedent. I think, given the fact that your contractor was highly qualified, you probably have some grounds for some legal remedies there, which I would encourage you to pursue, because I don't think, if he really was qualified, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to recoup some of that cost. It seems like he misrepresented to you what he was capable of doing, and apparently he's gotten in trouble with, I don't know, whoever governs the general contractor. So if that's true, I think that's makes a pretty big case for you there. So yeah, I don't think that this is going to be okay.
Okay, so I guess all the commissioners have voiced their opinions. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve staff recommendation.
I'll second that.
Okay, discussions. Am I allowed to suggest amendments to the motion?
Of course.
Yeah, I like to suggest, I like to amend the motion in that we accept the variance on the height.
Oh, sorry, may I just clarify, Madam Chair? I believe the minor modification is not even before the commission tonight?
Well, we did roll it into the request, so it would be considered because it relates, essentially has the same findings as a minor modification. The minor modification is the same thing as the variance. So, but if there was a support for the variance, then we would probably just include that in the motion.
But so did the zoning administrator make a determination essentially on the height, or?
There was no action related to that because of the violation of the setback requirement, so.
See.
I believe that the height was within the 25% discretion of the director of planning, so that could be approved regardless, based on the approval by discretionary approval. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, but the findings for that discretion are the same as the variance findings that you see before you. So we have to make the same findings.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, the agenda did include both the variance and the minor modification, so it would be appropriate for the planning commission to act on the minor modification if it's so inclined.
As separate motions?
That's up to, actually strike that. Yeah, you have to act on it in separate motions. That'll be compound. It's two separate actions, yeah.
Okay, so the
So-
variance is on the setback and the motion is on the height?
Correct.
Thank you.
The modification
I
is
mean,
on the height.
modification is on the height. Okay.
Right, and the motion on the floor is just regarding the variance.
Okay, understand. Thank you very much for the clarification. All right, so that addresses my question. Commissioner Reinhardt? Okay, all right. Any other comments or discussions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any dissent? Okay, so the motion carries. The variance is denied.
With Commissioner O'Halloran dissenting,
And
And
Kelly.
and
Kelly.
Commissioner Kelly, so motion carries 4-2.
Okay,
So this action is final unless there's an appeal within 7 days, and that can be made through the planning department, and this action will go forward to the city council if there's an appeal filed.
thank you. Okay, do we have a second motion?
I move to approve the minor modification on the height.
a second.
Okay, any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay.
May I just thank the commission for your time and careful attention to this.
Okay, good luck with the structure. Okay.
Item 6B is it's to increase the number of units at 2600 and through 2610 Augustine Drive in Santa Clara Square to add 40 units. I guess it's 40 plus 7 totally, so it's really 47, 7 of them in the model, but maybe you can clarify that.
I would like to state that I have met with the applicant, Colleen Matchniff and Jim Canine, and we discussed the addition of the 40 units, and I had some concerns about the additional parking, that it's adding 101 parking spots. So we discussed that and the traffic impacts and impact fees.
I also discussed it with the lobbyists with Jim Canine.
As did I.
I also met the applicant and Jim Canine.
Okay, I don't have anything to declare. Let's see. Would the staff like to present?
So the request tonight is for a rezoning from a plan development to a plan development. The applicant has requested a change to the prior approval. I call it the 2015 project that was approved by council in December of 2015. That approval allowed up to 1,800 units. And with that 1,800 units, the applicant has made some adjustments, and they're requesting to go up to 1,840. Part of the request is also to take 7 of those units, not those units, but they're taking 7 prior units that was going to be in the first phase that is under construction right now, and make them into models. They're not going to be plumbed, so they'll never become units. They're just going to become a showroom. And so there's 7 showroom units that are in the phase 1 of this mixed-use development that is under construction at this point. The added units are going to be occurring in the later phase, building 6 and 7, noted in your staff reports. So that is the basic request. The general plan is regional mixed use and high density residential, which basically allows up to the 50 dwelling units per acre. What the applicant had noted in the request is that they're basically using a discretionary policy in the general plan that basically says if they're basically LEED Gold or higher, in equivalent, they basically can go up to a 10% increase on the density or intensity of use. So that basically allows them up to 55 dwelling units per acre. The 1840 on 33.5 acres is essentially 55 dwelling units per acre. So they're within the general plan allowance that was approved back in 2015. The prior improvements, entitlements that I noted also included the portion of Santa Clara Square where there's an office and the retail. The office is, phase 1 was completed. It has Ericsson as a tenant, and the phase 2 and 3 are near completion, and they're taking occupancy at this point. The first part of the retail had the Whole Foods and a number of restaurants that had gone in. The mixed-use portion would add, that was approved in 2015, add additional retail on the ground floor of 2 of the residential buildings. That's why it's noted as a residential mixed-use development. This shows the requested changes on this slide. On the 2 buildings that they're basically modifying to add the units, what you'll see is that one of the swimming pools has been altered so that it could basically fit the units in the development. The other one, they reconfigured the building. The architecture is consistent with what was approved, the architectural style. But one thing to keep in mind is that they have amenities throughout the development. And the way the project is conditioned and worked through our Parks Department is that any resident can use any of the facilities in any of the other buildings. So in essence, you could, in Building 7, you can basically go to Building 3 and use their facilities, whether it's a gym or the swimming pool there, and vice versa. Someone from the other building can move over too. So this was presented to our Parks Department. They're acceptable of the condition still remains. There is no change to that concept of having the full amenities being shared within all the buildings. This summarizes what I had mentioned earlier on the request. And the recommendation that we're looking for is a recommendation council to approve the EIR addendum number 1. And and that environmental addendum looked at greenhouse gases and any other impacts, basically going through a checklist. And you had that in your packet. We also have our environmental consultant, Impact Sciences, here to answer any questions if you have of the addendum. Approval of the rezoning to plan development for the reclassification to the model showroom and the additional units above the 1800 to 1840. And refer the design and other minor changes to the Community Development Director, which basically is allowed for in the development agreement. And some of those adjustments also include, for example, recalculation of the park fees and those type of items. But in essence, the development agreement, there's no change to it. Those elements are still there. One of the things that you probably are concerned about is with regards to the affordable housing. The council and the development agreement action basically call for 10% affordable units. And so with the additional 40, they'll basically add another four units to that mixture. And that provision still stands in the development agreement. And we'll entertain any questions that you have.
Okay, Commissioner Jane?
Yeah, if they're taking 7 units and making them permanently leasable, right? So that gets them down to 1793 units. So then they're adding really 47 more units, correct? I mean, if you look at the footprint of the building, there's really...
That's correct.
Okay. And so my question is, when you do the affordable housing, I guess it's on 1840, which is still really 10% of 40, not 10% of 47. Is that how you would look at it?
That's correct. The original approval is based upon the number of units. So 1840,
yeah,
10% of that.
Okay, so it would be 4 units, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Kelly?
Okay. So when they increase it by another 40 units, 10% are still going to be, what, low to moderate or affordable units, is that correct?
We basically say affordable because inside the development agreement, there's provisions for on-site and off-site. And there's a different mixture with regards to the ratio of affordability.
Okay. All right, but if there are 40 more units, we're basically going to get either at this location or another location, an additional 4 units that are low to moderate income.
Affordable units, so you'll be moderate,
units.
yes.
Okay, all right, that was my question. Thank you.
Commissioner Chahal?
So I understand the affordable units are off-site, right?
There's a provision in the development agreement that within 3 years, if they don't find basically an off-site, they have to basically take care of on-site. There's also another benchmark that we use, which is at some point they're going to try to take occupancy. If they're ahead of their schedule, that's also another benchmark for us to, have a decision made as to assignment of the affordable units on-site.
I know I should know that because it gone through. Do you have a timeline, like when they have to provide the affordable unit? Like after occupancy, before occupancy of X number of units, and that timeline as per our development
There's
agreement?
an agreement in the development agreement. So inside that, there's a 3-year timeline for them to basically secure an off-site location. If it's not off-site, they have to basically provide all the affordable units on-site. So
So that 3-year, when does that start? After occupancy or from the day we permitted this thing last year or whenever it was?
the requirement for the off-site is the 3 years from the 2015 approval by council.
Okay, got it.
The on-site is, if they move ahead of the schedule, we have other control points that we have to ensure that they're going to be able to meet the on-site affordability requirements.
Okay, thank you.
So can you explain, this was a while ago, how does a park fee and the park on-site recreation facility, how did all that work?
I could address that. As you know, our parkland dedication ordinance imposes a dedication requirement based upon the number of units a developer builds. The city's preference is always, we want parkland put in, but as most sites are constrained, we recognize that there will frequently have to be a division of land and fees. So the Parks Department approved the particular division of land and fees that Irvine proposed for this development. With the addition of 40 more units, they will now be subject to provide the equivalent of either an additional amount of parkland or additional fees for those 40 units. I strongly suspect they'll be doing it entirely with fees, given that their site hasn't gotten any bigger. But the development agreement expressly provides that they will have to provide those additional fees if they provide a different additional units, and that's exactly what's happening here.
And are the additional 40 units taking away from the recreational land the part of the land on this property dedicated to, I guess, the rec?
As the development goes forward and gets refined, it was understood in the development agreement that there might be minor adjustments. There's a provision in the development agreement that those minor adjustments be managed by the community development director and the parks director. And so even at this point in time, there are minor adjustments to the site, and those fee calculations and adjustments are treated as minor changes in the development agreement.
And are the 40 units taking away from the land the amount of space that was going to be dedicated to as recreational area according to the 2015
The basic, the basic answer to that is there's a figure that talks about the difference with regards to the open space, and essentially it is the same. The main park area that is the open area is essentially the same, but there might be some minor adjustments where the trailhead occurs and such, but those are very minor, and those are taken account as minor changes. So it is not a major change that would require them to come back through a plan development and back to the city council, planning commission and council.
But I'm not sure if you answered my
So
question. Are they going to dedicate less space to?
No, so the 2015 project calls for a public open space at 4.12 acres. The revised project is it will basically have 4.17. So there's a 0.05 difference in acres.
Increase.
Yes, increase
Okay,
Open spaces,
of open
thank you,
space.
thank you.
public.
Yeah.
It's lower private.
Yeah, the public. There's a little bit more private, but
Totally, it's slightly less open space.
that's correct.
But it's not
Per
open to
table one.
general public, only open to the
Yeah,
residents.
it's
Will be more
just the
open to the
private amenity
public.
space is reducing 0.17 acres, but that's the private amenity space.
Private amenity space.
Right.
Yeah, the public space increases 0.05 acres.
4/10 of it.
4/10. The private is reduced, but that's why I noted about the amenities. There's many different amenities in each of the different buildings, and the residents at this particular site is able to use any of the facilities in any of the buildings with their fob, with their keys.
But those are only for the residents.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a,
Okay, Commissioner Jane.
Xander, can you clarify? My understanding is all of the additional units are going to be two-bedroom units. And so a two-bedroom unit is supposed to generate more people than a one-bedroom unit. And the parkland fee is supposed to be based on the number of residents. So is it per unit or per square foot or per generated occupant?
I think Gloria remembers offhand better than I do.
So, yeah, the parkland calculation is based upon the demand per person.
Correct.
But then we also have a household type that, so we're saying X number of residents would be generated through this type of unit, and then there's the calculation for the park fee based on the per capita requirement, which is, I forget what the ratio is, it's your 3.5 per acre, what the city uses as a standard per person. So that proportional share, what it requires to purchase the land and improve it to parkland standards would be what is assessed for the fee.
Right, so there's a higher occupant generation rate for a two-bedroom than a one-bedroom, and that's built into this calculation, is that correct?
That's correct. On the recalculation for any adjustments, those are presented to the Community Development Director and the Parks Director for recalculations. So if they made adjustments to the ratios, such as a one-bedroom to a two-bedroom, or reducing the numbers from two bedrooms to one, those would be submitted for calculation.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Commissioner O'Halloran.
Yes, my understanding from the attachments here is that there'll be a mix. The 40 will be a mix of units, one bedrooms. But in any case, what I saw, and probably the applicant can speak to this, is there was an estimate of increased fees for these 40 units. So I'd like to see that, and perhaps the applicant can provide that. And the
Okay,
staff can confirm.
thank you. All right, I guess we're ready to go to the public, the applicant to come and present.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Carlene Matchniff, Vice President of Entitlements and Public Affairs for the Irvine Company. Hopefully I can clarify a few of your questions this evening. We're very pleased to be here this evening and hopefully provide some additional housing to help balance the jobs housing in the region. This is an image of our overall master plan. Just to remind you, we have about 165,000 square feet of retail. We have 1,800 units and about 2 million square feet of office. We're going to be building out about 1.7 million square feet of office at this time. And as you know, the shopping center is already constructed and we're beginning to build phase one and two of the 1,800 units. So what we're asking for, as Yen went through this evening, is to go to the maximum of our 55 DUs per acre and add that additional 40 units. And to clarify on the 7 model showrooms we're asking for, those will never be rentable space. And we basically shortchanged ourselves because we deducted 7 model showrooms from our 1,800 originally. So now we're converting those back to model showrooms. So we're entitled to the 1,800 under the original entitlement, and now we're recapturing that 7, so it's 47 additional units. Just to remind you, this is a very highly connected community, bicycle oriented connection of trails, and all kinds of open space and park amenities and preservation of redwood trees into a redwood trail system. Just to give you a little update on where we're at. So the San Tomas Creek Trail connection will occur now, fall of 2017. We spent a lot of time with the Water Authority recently, getting all of those approvals, and the city. Phase 1 is under construction and 347 units. As if you go out there, you can see everything going up in the air. So that will open in this coming summer of 2018, with Phase 2 shortly thereafter, fall of 2018. The public park, we've gone through the system with Parks Department and gotten all the plans approved and the design, and that will open up in spring of 2019. Then Phase 3 and 4 will follow on in 2020. And that is actually where these units will be located in the last phase. But we have to get this entitlement now because, of course, we have to go through our construction document approval. On retail, we have a use called Illuminate Body Treatments, and that is opening here in November 2017, like a day spa. Puesto Restaurant is planning to open February 2018, Verizon, and then we have continued lease discussions along the double-sided retail street of Coronado. Very exciting uses coming there. Phase 1 of office is completion now, October 2017. We have a signed lease we'll be announcing very shortly. And then Phase 2, we had SIG move in, insurance providers. We have AMD coming in November of 2017, moving their operation from Sunnyvale. Emergent Payments, which is a payment processing company, opening also now. And then we have what's called Ready Now space for the small user, which is very exciting opportunity to allow a smaller kind of user coming into our office. And so this again shows you the 1840, and this is what we call buildings 6 and 7, where the additional units will go. And then in this area right here is where those model showrooms will be located. This just shows you kind of what those models will look like, give you an idea of that. We're going to continue being consistent with our formal Italian, formal Spanish, Palladian architecture, which you will see, throughout the previous approval. Here are a few renderings showing from Scott Boulevard. We have such mature trees and then adding additional landscaping. So you're really not going to see the buildings, fully facing the street. You'll see a lot of vegetation along there, which really makes it nice and lush. And then here is a rendering from Scott Boulevard also. And then this is a rendering, like if you were standing at the park looking out at Building 6, this is what you're going to see. We have some nice stands of redwoods there. And then I just put in a few images to kind of remind you of what the build out of the rest of the project will look like with the double-sided retail street and how the architecture blends and is consistent with our previous approval. This again is the park, showing all the features of the park. And this is what we call the Great Meadow Park. People can play pickup games, and you can see one of the pools in the distance, which Yen indicated that the residents are permitted to use. Now here's the summary of the fees, and this just captures some of the major fees, permits and processing, utility fees. For the park fees, 40 additional units will bring over $1 million in park fees based on your current ordinance. So that's pretty exciting. We also are going to honor our current school fee obligation that we have in our mitigation agreement with the school district. So we're going to be paying double school fees, basically a $183,000 contribution and then a voluntary contribution of another $183,000. So they will get that. And then what is not on here calculated is the value of those 4 additional affordable units. You're going to get 10% of 40, bringing the new total to 184. And if they're built on site, it's a 30-year commitment of half moderate and half low income. If they're built off-site, which we are currently looking for an acquisition, they will be 50% very low, 50% low for a term of 55 years. So it's really important for us to explore that option because it does bring a longer life to the affordable project at 55 years and a lower AMI, average median income. So it's really exciting to be able to offer these, fees and amenities to the city. And we're available for any questions.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Questions? Okay, Commissioner O'Halloran?
I'm not sure at this point where to ask this, but in the original submission, even though it wasn't required, you made a voluntary contribution to the VTA based on some assumption that there would be a certain amount of highway impact and like. Would Irvine make a similar contribution based on the 40 additional?
No, that was a one-time contribution. And, we did an additional addendum, and it was not determined that there was any significant impacts by adding 40 additional units. So, we're honoring the development agreement, which indicates that we paid that VTA fee, we paid the transportation fees, all of the fees that we've already paid. In fact, we've paid $41 million to date in upfront fees as per that development agreement. So it's quite a sum of money.
The only reason I raised that, because that's actually one of the primary concerns that I've heard raised, is the traffic impact on there. And to the extent that you made the voluntary contribution, that was a good answer to it, and that's why I suggested possibly more. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, the development agreement that we're discussing here with the VTA contribution, it was for $103,000 for that voluntary inclusion in our development agreement, and that already has been paid.
Commissioner Kelly?
Okay. It seems like every time we get a letter, they hit the main points. Developers aren't paying more fees, but I'm happy that the schools will be getting additional funds, the parks will be getting additional funds. And I know at the previous meeting when you were in front of us, you talked about the transit management system that you had. But if you could just touch on it, because that is one of the comments that we received, how this project will be more managed through bicycle transit than other projects that we have that are older in the community.
Yeah, we have a transportation demand management plan that we have put together, and we've submitted a draft to the city. We have designed this as a sustainable project with multimodal opportunities, shuttle stops, stops for other types of transportation, full bike lanes and trails, trail connectivity. So we're trying to, and pedestrian paths throughout, so we're trying to make it so that people could work here, live here, buy their groceries here and eat here, dine here, and then get out to the places they need to easily with the shuttle stops, the Uber stops, and this sort of thing. And then the TDM plan actually stresses and looks for ways to cut down on trips, and it's a whole programmatic set of goals for the project that will have an annual report once we reach the occupancy requirements of the plan. You obviously can't start measuring it until you have people living there, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Hopefully, we'll see more and more of this with the traffic concerns that our residents have. Thank you.
Commissioner Jane?
So to Commissioner O'Halloran's remarks, there's a table number 1 here in the document, and it says Building 2 will have 4 fewer 2-bedrooms. Building 6 will have 32 additional 2-bedrooms. Building 7 will have 19 additional 2-bedrooms, which means that the whole project will have an additional 47 2-bedrooms. And in addition, the entire complex will have 101 extra parking spots. So I guess I'm not a huge fan of parking, and I believe that in the future with autonomous vehicles and Uber and Lyft, that parking demands will continue to go down. So I know you do annual reporting on your TDM plan, and I was wondering if you could add a parking survey to that TDM plan to do, in addition to, the exit and entrance counts, just like what they did in a San Jose State University study, was they went in late at night and they counted the number of occupied spots and vacant spots. And so if we could track that over time, the city could use that data to then design future projects as we see the impact of autonomous vehicles and Uber and Lyft. So I guess, would you be amenable to adding like a parking survey to your TDM
Well,
annual?
one of the things that I need to point out is, this is a unique project because we have adjacent retail. And we want that retail to be successful, but we also need to park that retail. So the additional parking that you're referring to is going to be dedicated to retail. And so, we have the double-sided retail, we have the center, and if you go over there right now, it's obvious that it's popular and, we need to find retail parking, and at peak lunch hour and dinner, we need to make sure we have adequate parking. So I think that to do, an apartment survey when we're addressing the retail parking at the same time is going to be a little more difficult to say, well, this many people are parking here for the retail. So I think, it's not something we want as a condition of this project, certainly. And we're working, with staff on the retail parking. We have overflow parking in the office, but those extra spaces that you're referring to above code is dedicated for the retail.
If I may, through the chair.
And guest parking, so.
To answer a little bit of the question, how we've been addressing some of the, with regards to parking survey, what is the end goal? The end goal, I think, is, with the climate action plan, is vehicle miles traveled. And so there's a requirement in our conditions of approval of, for this project, of a 20% reduction through vehicle miles traveled, and 10% of it is required through TDM. So, and that basically kicks in at a certain point when they have a certain amount of occupancy. Then we have the annual reporting that would basically be triggered for that. If they are not able to meet through that requirement, then the city would basically work with the property owner to add additional measures to measure and to adjust the vehicle miles traveled through additional TDM measures.
I understand that. My goal is that, if Irvine were to come to us with another project 5 years from now and could demonstrate that, hey, there's a lot of vacant parking in this structure, then wouldn't the city be interested in relaxing its 2 parking spots per 2-bedroom and 1.5 parking spots per 1-bedroom requirement? Because I personally think they're excessive.
I think that's part of the discussion would be for parking regulations. We have certain parking standards. What we have on a number of these planned developments that have come in is they use the parking standards that are called for in our transit ordinance mixed use ordinance, which basically has shifted to bedrooms, versus our standard requirement for multifamily is 1 covered and 1 uncovered space, which is 2 per unit. For the longest time, we had standards of about 1.8 as an adjustment down as a modification request for many, many years. But on many projects that you have heard from many of the applicants, they're saying that it could go down to 1.5, maybe even lower. There's examples of affordable housing near transit being able to get down to even 1.0. And like senior housing, we basically are oriented toward a 1.0 standard. But right now, our parking regulations has those 2 types of standards. And one of the things is it's in discussion with Irvine, they're basically looking toward the city as having the lead as to what is our standard. And they're basically trying to meet that requirement.
Right, but we had like somebody from, what was the organization?
Transform.
Right, Transform come and talk to us about the efforts that people are making to determine the true parking needs. And since Irvine is such a big project, it will be a great opportunity for Santa Clara to collect important data to see what the parking needs are moving forward. Because we know that all these technological changes are coming. And do we need to continue to have two parking per unit requirement, which is so expensive for the developer. And,
One of the
it
things
takes
you
away
have
from the housing spaces, additional housing that might be built.
Yeah, if I may, in discussion with not only Irvine, but many of the developers, they are always continuously looking at the parking regulations that the agency has developed and also their own parking standards of what is successful.
Right, but like at the senior housing that, that's going to be, well, that we recommended for approval on the El Camino, the developer agreed to provide the parking utilization data after 1 year, and then every 2 years subsequently. I even suggested that maybe they can build in sensor technology in each parking space, like the ones that they have at Santana Row, so that you can collect this data automatically instead of having people go out to the parking structures in the middle of the night. So the technology is becoming available to collect that data more easily, and I think this is an opportunity for Irvine to help themselves.
Well, one of the things you have to remember is that one of the TDM measures is unbundled parking, okay? So that gives us an opportunity to see if people want to actually have a second space in the apartments, if they are willing to pay for that second space, or they have one car and that's adequate for them. So this is new territory we're testing with, the TDM measures, the unbundling of parking. So I think, through the annual monitoring report for the TDM, we can start to explore those kinds of things and look at, are people wanting still 2 cars or not? And I think that's going to be useful information that the city is gathering from us through the annual monitoring. And you can start to look at that and say, there's a trend here. There's only, people are either buying spaces or they're not. And, the goal is to reduce the need for cars and go to other forms of transportation. So I think that's going to be useful to look at what you're, trying to get at.
I don't remember all the details within the TDM plan that has been drafted. We haven't gone to the phase of basically to the point of the annual survey point yet because they are just under construction of the units. We typically are looking at around 70 to 80% occupancy before we do the annual collection of data. And so we'll continue to work with the Irvine on looking at those TDM measures to see if parking counts can be in there with regards to vehicle miles travel reduction. Again, it's not a direct one-to-one, parking spaces doesn't equate to, or usage doesn't equate to vehicle miles traveled, but it is an indication, so we'll basically continue to work with the applicant on that.
So can we, can Irvine report to us on the parking rental status then? How many of the residents are renting 1 space, 2 spaces?
Well, I
That
think,
would be a very
again,
useful
this
information.
measure is going to, be part of the TDM plan, so we can look at that. And I think the city as a whole, aren't you looking at all these TDM plans, Yen, as a collection of your GHG?
I'm not sure if you
reduction
answered my
strategies?
question, so are you going to collect this information?
Well,
or-
we will when people either buy an extra space or not. When this parking is unbundled, they will either say, I'm good with 1 space, or I'm going to purchase the second space, because they're going to be renting that second space.
Right.
So we're going to have that data, and we're going to know whether it's effective or not as, part of our VMT reduction strategy as part of the TDM plan.
But what I'm asking is, are you going to report that data to Santa Clara?
The answer basically is yes. It's a condition of approval.
Okay.
It'll be part of our annual review, but the buildings are under construction. They haven't gone to leasing yet. And so the data for Santa Clara residential mixed use would probably come back to the planning commission or to the city approximately about 2 years from now. Because they take occupancy, and then we'll start to have the annual audit the subsequent year for collection of that data and reporting back.
Well, that's, to me, it sounds reasonable. How does Commissioner Jane, what does Commissioner Jane think?
I think all data is good.
Okay, all right. Sounds good. Okay, Commissioner Chahal.
So can you please elaborate a little bit on the shuttle service under TDM?
Well, we're just developing that program, and our office group is actually, working with Lyft on a partnership. We're also, in fact, today, we were even talking about in a design meeting about locations throughout the community where we would identify stops, and it would be hooked to an app where someone would say, I'm at stop 1, and then, go there. So we're experimenting with the latest technology on how to facilitate people using shuttle stops, whether it be a company shuttle stop or whether it be Uber, Lyft, something like this. So it's, it's an evolving, science for us, given that the community's under construction. But the part of the demand is our employment base there and what they're seeking. And so we're just, one thing good about Irvine Company is because we own and continue to manage our projects, we can listen to the customer and evolve all these services over time and improve upon them as technology changes. So, what I say to you today, in 2 years may change, but it is, we have shuttle stops built into the community and identifiable, but we're going to look at connecting those to apps and, improving upon that.
Okay, so basically, what, if I understand it right, you're connecting different buildings and the Erickson building and with the residential within the complex, as well as you'll provide some shuttle service to, say, Caltrans or something like that too.
Yeah, we're working and just to see, what evolves from that, yes.
That was my point. If you can provide within the complex, because it's a pretty big complex, and providing some shuttle service within the complex, that would
Well,
be.
we don't, let me correct, we don't have a shuttle that we're saying, is a Santa Clara Square shuttle. It's not that type of a shuttle service at this point.
No,
So-
if Uber or Lyft, who can
Oh, yes.
take people from
Yes,
one
yes.
building to the other
Absolutely.
building, yeah. I don't mean to have a big bus for that now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
okay. And my second request is like, this is true mixed use. And if you can have some bigger leasing contracts with the companies who are your tenants on different buildings, like Erickson, AMD, if they can own, let's say, 300 apartments, like lease 300 apartments. So that gives more feeling to the community as well as to residents. Oh, okay. So if those are leased, so it means those are purely going to the employees who will walk to the complexes. So if you can take a very proactive approach, approaching these, your tenants on the office side, and ask them for a, it's in your benefit too, long-term lease, and
Yes.
and it's in benefit of the residents too, so that they know that people from outside are not staying, like, people can stay from outside, but if you have bigger leases, it makes more attractive for people to walk to those places and other stuff.
Yeah, we completely agree with that. And over the years, we have in multiple, projects, we have corporate leases that we have done with many of the tech companies in Silicon Valley, and we welcome working with them, on this project as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Kelly.
Okay, here we go. All right. First, I want to thank Irvine for promising to share the data. Obviously, we need it with the concerns that residents are having. And what I would like to see is these projects get fully occupied if the data can be shared quickly with us, because as we get projects that keep coming in front of us, shuttle services, Lyft, unbundling parking, residents are skeptical, and the faster staff can get this from developers like Irvine, the easier it is for us to approve projects with less parking using the newer services that are picking up the slack that our current transit systems do not give to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Halloran.
Yes, one question for staff. Does this go to council? Because it's a zoning change?
Yes, it does.
Okay. One question I have is on the TDM, are there objectives to that? Or is it just simply a data gathering?
No, the target is a 20% VMT reduction strategy. And it's 10% through measures and 10% through design, which we have built into the projects.
Okay. Is that in any way a fee associated with that if you do not achieve those objectives?
Not at this point,
I know we've gone through this, and it may have been on the Santa Clara Square. I recognize that it's difficult for management to control that with a lot of mixed uses in there. And also, I think, like your statement to jobs to housing, this is one of the types of solutions that does reduce that and does potentially, it's hard to tell, it may or may not add traffic, and that was some of the points in the attachments we received. I did want to go back to this letter from Mark Dapton, because it really clarifies a lot of the issues that people have, residents have with high density. And I think this is a little bit more unique and talks about the bike paths. And I think your demonstration, this is why I asked for it, of the fees that you are providing do answer some of those questions on it. The toughest one, I think, maybe is more of a policy question for our goal or whatever for the city rather than individual developers, is understanding that traffic impact. And if there are fees, I think he notes here as mass transit impact fees, it's actually just the opposite. It's traffic impact fees, and mass transit may be a solution to some of that on there. But I did want to say that. And I do have some questions, but I think there are more questions for staff.
Just to note, we've paid $650,000 in traffic mitigation fees and a $536,000 voluntary traffic contribution. So those were already paid.
Okay, is that different than the VTA, which I was asking about earlier?
Those are also in addition to the VTA.
So those go to the city for those mitigations?
Yeah.
And to Santa Clara, because I know there was concern about.
There was a list of
places.
mitigation areas that this money would be funneled towards. We worked with Dennising in traffic to identify where these funds went, and I'm sure you can find that out.
And the objective is not so much the fees, but
Yeah, if I
figure out the mitigation.
If I may, this project is unique in the sense of the size and the scope and the opportunity to work with the city. And so a number of items are noted as economic benefits or noted as community benefits. And some of those that you're concerned with is in regards to connectivity to our creek trail. It's been noted that creek trail can be used, for commuters and also for recreational activity. And there's 2 direct connections. There's a trailhead off of Scott that is right adjacent to building number 6. And then there's a northern connection between the parking garage and the first office building along Octavius. And then that leads also to basically bike paths and trails that was built into the project. And this is in addition to the fair share fees that has been calculated. There's additional fair share fees in the development agreement that would come forward as you basically pull building permits. But our fair share fees for transportation called for in the development agreement calls for just a little bit under $1 million. It's $911,000 plus some change for that, in addition to the VTA, which brings it over at $1 million in traffic fair share and mitigation. But it's those additional trail connections, bike paths, and those connectivity points that are not identified as dollar values.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I like it. It seems like we're actually increasing access to the creek trail with some of this development here. That's from
That's correct.
discussions I had with your representative. Good, thank you.
So the affordable housing, you are not obligated to provide that yet, but which direction are you leaning towards? Off-site or on-site or?
Well, currently we are exploring an off-site location, which is going through an acquisition right now. Once that acquisition's complete, then we would be bringing it forward to council. So basically, we have an election period of 3 years. So we are a little over a year into that period. And once we select either an off-site or on-site location, then we will work with city staff on all the details of those plans. But we're very diligently trying to determine, what the best opportunity is here. And as I mentioned to you, it's a 25-year longer, commitment to affordable housing if it's off-site. So that is our first priority, to provide 55 years. The second would be the on-site location.
So if you were to do off-site, you're talking about purchasing a property and managing, Irvine to manage it?
There are different ways to do that, and we're still exploring those. One of the options is to have an affordable housing partner, and they would become the manager, property, management company, and we would be in a partnership or not in a partnership. There's different ways of structuring the land deal, and we haven't determined, what that final deal would be. But we do have the ability to set it up with, that sort of a structure.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Chahal.
So this just came to my mind, numbers. So if we go outside affordable, right? So we have a additional 184 units, right? Whereas if we do it over here, we'll be taking out from 1840 units.
Yeah.
So
That's
basically, we have benefit of going outside, we have additional 184 units.
That is correct.
Okay, good.
Or the units that we currently have under, if we were to be approved today, would be the 1840, and we would be taking the 180.
Out of those.
Exactly. That we would be converting 184 of those to affordable housing.
Okay, so basically, it's a win-win for both city and you too.
Commissioner O'Halloran.
I'm sorry. More questions?
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So would anybody else from the public like to speak?
They're all with me.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, so. They can still speak. Yeah, of course. So nobody else is speaking, which means no rebuttal. So any motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, discussions. Commissioner O'Halloran.
Yes, my question is to staff. And this is again an important issue for the residents. My question is to staff, and it's not specifically related to this project, but is within the documents here. And it talks about an impact analysis for water supply. And it says that the water department somewhere is talking about actions if it's greater than 10% increase in the total projected demands, or some 10% thresholds. And my concern is that this is below the thresholds, is 1.9% increase. But if we keep approving different areas, rather than saying, yeah, you only did 1.9, you only did 1.9, there's really a cumulative effect on the water supply. So rather than looking at them individually, I think somewhere we need to be accumulating the impact of water analysis on all these developments, not signaling them out.
Yeah, we have our environmental consultant here, but if I may try to answer that, and there might be a supplement to this. When the project comes forward, when we do the environmental review, one of the things that we have to determine is whether we need to go before the water body agency and ask if there's a water supply is available. In this case, the city is a purveyor, and so it went to our city council with the water supply assessment report. No, the city is basically a utility. The city is a water utility. And so, from all different sources. And so one of the things is for projects that have a potential regional impact over a certain number of units or over a certain number of square footage, they're required to basically go to the water utility and say, is there enough water to supply this development? And so that was already done. For this particular project, it was just an addendum, and it was noted the additional change for the additional 40 units went before our water utility, and they answered the question that it doesn't need to go back. We have the water, according to the regional water supply assessment report. That was
So they're doing the cumulative analysis.
That's correct.
So
So the full analysis was done on the
it
overall
just seems like
development.
something you can't judge on an individual piece-by-piece basis. You really
Yeah,
have to be
and
looking
that's
at
why
that.
the state law was changed, so that we would basically cover that within our environmental analysis prior to taking action on a project.
And just to mention, Commissioner O'Halloran, the threshold is 500,000 square feet of, non-residential or over 500 units. So anytime that we reach that threshold, then there is 50,000 square feet or 500 units. And so it is, the water supply assessment is done, and then any increment that would reach, again, towards that threshold would be evaluated. Otherwise, it would just be an evaluation for the water supply in general, but that falls under our urban water management plan. So we do a long-term perspective. It's like a general plan for water supply and future growth, and that's done on a regular basis and updated every few years.
So that's not part of CEQA, it's a
No,
separate.
it is, and as Yen mentioned, the law requires that we actually certify the water supply assessment in advance of the CEQA document, so it has to go to council in advance of producing the document, and then it's actually, the WSA is incorporated into the EIR for the project.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Kelly.
Actually, Madam Chair, could I
Yes.
just offer a point of clarification because I screwed up earlier and didn't have a quick answer to Commissioner Jane. The planning staff was correct that we do collect data on bedrooms in a variety of circumstances for the city. There are a lot of analyses that we have, particularly from the Department of Finance, that track exactly how many people are in a one-bedroom, a two-bedroom unit. There's a nuance for our parks dedication ordinance. In order to make the ordinance defensible, we decided to rely upon census data. That meant that nobody could challenge our ordinance based on population size of the units. We did it just as a legal defense mechanism. As a result, the way our park ordinance is drafted is we have one dwelling unit size for single-family residences and one dwelling unit size for multifamily dwelling units. So all of the Irvine dwelling units that are in apartment buildings have one population size for purposes of our park ordinance, which is 2.24 persons per dwelling unit. So sorry, just wanted to offer that point of clarification. We don't vary the park fee based on whether it's a one-bedroom or two-bedroom. We vary it based on whether it's multifamily or single-family.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kelly.
Okay. I'm satisfied that all the concerns of the comments I've been hearing, I hear a lot from Mark, so I wanted to make sure we address impact fees, which developer is paying more for the additional units, that we address the transit management system, which I think the TDM system with unbundling parking, with adding shuttles and lift, shows that we are doing as much as possibly can as we increase our density in our city. So I support this. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the EIR Addendum 1 and approve the rezone plan development to allow the development of 1,840 dwelling units, reclassification of 7 units to leasing to show additional In addition to the previously approved 40,000 square feet of retail, 4,500 of leasing space, and 38,000 square feet of amenity space.
Okay, can we do this one by one? And, the first motion maybe could be about EIR?
That would be my preference. Thank you.
Okay, so a motion that we approved.
That's a recommendation to city council, just to
I would like
clarify.
to recommend to city council that we approve the EIR addendum number 1.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, any discussions? And we have several people with lights on this particular motion, or any comments? Okay, in general,
If you want to take later on after this motion, I'm okay.
well, then maybe you can turn the light off? Okay, thank you. All right, we have the second. Any discussions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, motion carries. All right, so we can either have the next motion, or we can go to Commissioner Chahal.
So I would like to have some comments from the staff regarding the letter, the only letter we got, like they were mentioned like mass transit, impact fees and other stuff. So I think, can you comment on that? Like are the traffic impact fees and fair share, are those the type of impact fees we are collecting?
Well, I think one thing that Mr. Apton's mentioned before, and something that's reiterated from the comment letters we get from Caltrans and VTA, is that they would like the city to actually more vigorously request voluntary contributions. I think that's in advance of them moving into mandatory, and that's to fund mass transit. So, so again, as Ms. Matchniff mentioned, they did contribute both to city infrastructure and requirements, and also contribution to VTA. But that's what they're looking for, is to basically, and he's looking for, is to enhance the amount of transit we have. And I think, as you mentioned, as Commissioner Jane mentioned, when Transform came, Nina Rizzo came here and made that presentation, there are various areas within the Bay Area that have varying levels of concentration of transit options. And in Oakland, where she was pointing out a lot of the information, is there's a higher concentration of transit options. San Francisco obviously has a little bit more mix of availability as well, whereas in a more suburban community, it isn't, say, other than our Lawrence Station area and the Santa Clara train station, there's not as much, plus the cross connections available. So they're looking for money to fund future improvements, but for right now, it's still treated on a voluntary basis. But we are still getting those contributions.
If I may, to add a little bit of body of information. This project was right at the forefront of where VTA and everybody else was in the Climate Action Plan, where we're looking for reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And so we do have that condition in the TDM measures. But keep in mind that the fair share analysis and about impacts of roadways are still based upon levels of service. And so that level of service basically triggered that, just below the $1 million, the 911,000 fair share requirement contribution beyond the infrastructure improvements that are required for all the intersections around the development site.
Yep. So irrespective of this project, actually, as a policy matter, does any of the greater Bay Area cities have something like that, mass transit impact fees or something? Which,
okay. Yeah, and again, this is just fairly recent. I mean, the VTA with regards to Apple and a number of developments that occurred, and also Caltran, they talk to each other. If you saw all the letters, you see that they CC'd each other, and they basically have the same request. Can there be voluntary contribution? And you had it before where you asked the applicants directly here, are you willing to basically do a voluntary contribution? And almost all of them come up to the mic and say no. Thank you, but in this particular instance, why is there a voluntary contribution? Because there was a development agreement and we basically negotiated and it was offered to have that.
My question was not for the applicant as such, but it was a more of a address to a resident's concern is if there is any policy matter which is adopted in any other city, can we adopt that? Or how we can mandate something like this? How we can address a resident's concern? That was my general question, basically.
Again, the fair shares have to do with, there has to be a nexus. So in order, if you're creating an impact, there has to be a direct correlation to the demand for ridership, the ridership and the facilities that are planned. You have to have planned projects. They have to have environmental clearance in order to collect fees for those. So that's why they're couched as voluntary contributions. So until the ridership numbers bump up quite a bit, because I believe overall the Bay Area, it's less than 8% of all, I think it's actually 3% of all trips are made on mass transit. So until those numbers can be bumped up, there's not any way to justify requiring developments to contribute to transportation, multimodal transportation. I think that'll evolve over time, but for right now, it's the voluntary contribution.
And I think the commission, if I may, we have very good coordination between all the public work agencies and our traffic engineers. And as an indication, they basically don't challenge on the environmental documents. And on a very few projects, I think maybe only one in the recent past has a transit agency, roads and airports have come to attend the Planning Commission meeting to talk about a particular improvement where they basically were concerned. And so there is good coordination at this point with regards to the improvements that are required on a regional level and the fair share contributions and how they're calculated. So when we basically bring forward to you what the fair share numbers are, those numbers have been vetted through our traffic engineer with our agency partners, the VTA, Caltrans, and that's why you basically have clean documents.
Yeah, but if I may add to that, like despite having the best coordination between the different agencies, one of the quality of life issues for the residents is the traffic. So it's still, that's one of the top quality of service for the resident. That's the reason I'm trying to explore this thing more. If there is anything as a policy matter city can do, irrespective of this project right now.
Yeah, so in my earlier discussion, the agencies are moving toward vehicle miles traveled, and yet all the legal standards are still based on levels of service. And so as we shift toward that, you'll probably see some different adjustments. And Transform was one of the partner folks that came to you and talked about using some tools to analyze vehicle miles traveled, but that doesn't necessarily address the legal aspect of levels of service at this point in time.
Okay, and other than that, I would like to make some comments like for this particular development, we are getting affordable housing, that's good. And this is one of the very good mixed-use, real mixed-use projects in the city where like there's a walkability from the residents to the offices. And I think if the Irvine can show me that 90% of the apartments has been leased by the offices close by, I will agree to give you 20% more of that, like so that more people can walk to and we have more housing affordability within the units. And other thing is this one is from quality of life of resident. This one is away from single family housing, at least 0.7 miles is the closest single family house. So it's not impacting the existing single family housing or their quality of life to an extent. And I hope with the numbers we hear back from you about the TDM measures and parking data which requested by Commissioner Jain. So it will show us some more improvements down the line, but even for your own projects, probably we can make some more improvements and on other projects. So I'm all in favor of this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jain.
Well, first I want to thank Irvine for bringing Whole Foods to Santa Clara. My wife loves you for that. As I mentioned at the last Planning Commission meeting, California is 49th out of 50 in per capita housing stock. So the fact that we're adding 40 units helps us move up that maybe to 48th. I really like the fact that this whole project is LEED Gold. And again, this is like an urban village. This is jobs plus housing plus retail. And as Commissioner Chahal had mentioned, single-family residences are far away from this project. So I actually only wish it weren't, the project weren't 75 units per acre, because in this location, we could have done that. So thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to recommend to the City Council approve the rezone from Plan Development to Plan Development PD to allow the development of 1,840 dwelling units, reclassification of 7 to leasing showroom, in addition to the previously approved 40,000 square feet of retail space, 4,500 square feet of, 40,000 of retail space, 4,500 of leasing space, 38,000 of amenity space.
Second.
Any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, the third recommendation, does that require a motion?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and do it.
Is this a recommendation to the council?
Yes.
Okay.
I recommend that we refer to the City Council the DA minor change items and project design to the Director of Community Development?
Yes, you're recommending to the city council that the city council refer those items to the director.
Okay,
as is authorized by
recommend to the City Council that they refer those items to the Director of Community Development.
Any seconds?
Second.
Okay, any discussions? All in favor? Oh, okay.
I just want to make sure I
Oh,
understand.
sorry.
What are those minor changes? What are we talking about here? Minor change items?
The minor changes, obviously the reconfiguration of some of the amenity space to accomplish adding the units to building number 6 and 7. Also for the leasing space, there might be some minor adjustments to the architecture and the adjustments on park fees. Those are all in the development agreement as minor change items.
Okay, thanks.
Basically, you're confirming that it's possible to amend the DA through the minor change process rather than going through a full-fledged amendment of the DA, which would require a separate public hearing. You're saying these are minor changes.
Okay, great.
Okay, all in favor, any other question? Commissioner Chahal?
This won't go to ARC, right?
At this point, it is not anticipated to go to the architecture committee.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, thank you. All right, next item is any public presentations? None. All right, reports of commission, board liaison, and committee, announcements, and other items. Okay, appointment of board or committee assignments.
I would like to make an announcement.
I would like to suggest we nominate somebody for secretary since Commissioner Wang is leaving. Who was the secretary?
Oh, yeah.
Make it official. And I'd rather not do it. I'd rather extend that opportunity to other people. 'Cause I had done it before.
Should we wait until the next commissioner is appointed, or, I guess it doesn't
We
matter.
could nominate them now and then.
Can we?
It's your discretion. You
Okay,
can
all right.
nominate them now. but you cannot appoint them now. You'll have to agendize that for a future meeting.
Okay,
But you can do it with just the 6 of you. You don't need to
Okay.
wait.
thank you.
It's up to you.
Okay, so yeah, let's do that. Let's, okay, so anyone interested in serving? Do you want, anyone wants to nominate themselves? Anyone wants to nominate somebody else?
I'll nominate Brandon.
I second that.
Okay, all right. Would Commissioner Reinhardt be interested in serving as the secretary? Sure. Okay, so let's nominate Commissioner Reinhardt, and we will have on our next agenda on the vote on the new secretary. Thank you.
So I have an announcement.
Okay, Commissioner Jane.
Who has the card?
What?
Who has the card?
What card?
The card, because there's an announcement that we didn't hear about, except.
What?
There it is.
This?
Oh, you got it.
Oh.
Ran away.
Well, unfortunately, everyone did not get to sign it, but we have a card for Gloria. Thank you for
Yeah.
supporting us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been really great to have you.
You're permitted to reassess that. I
Thank you very
suppose. I don't know.
much.
So are you going to be coming in front of us someday?
Think if it's gone, but
I might.
Yeah.
I might, yeah.
Yep. That would be awesome.
what is the group that you're going to?
It's Michael Baker International.
Okay, and they're based where?
They're in Monterey for their primary office and float around. So, yeah, they have assignments all over the world, so be working for them. And yeah, right now I'm going to stay local, but you never know. Might move on, so. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. We're gonna miss you, Gloria.
Thank
We
you.
really will.
I'm gonna miss you all very much. Like I said, it's been my pleasure serving you. It's been one of my favorite parts of the job, so definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so any other announcements?
May I jump in very briefly?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce our Deputy City Attorney, Daniel Zazueta, who joined us several months ago. Daniel's been doing a great job as our deputy for several months, and prior to joining us, he served at the Department of Energy for 6.5 years. So you may see his head popping up here at some future Planning Commission meetings.
So we have 3 attorneys now?
Oh, you've
Been in the news lately.
moving from Washington to this place? Oh, good. Good.
Oh, okay. So we have three attorneys?
You have potentially 3 attorneys. Ms. Pizzelli and I are still the primary attorneys assigned to the Planning Division, but Daniel will be getting involved as well.
Okay, nice meeting you. Welcome. Okay, so I don't know when to mention this, but at the previous meeting, many commissioners expressed interest in learning about the new laws that were passed recently, the new state laws.
The housing.
Yeah, about housing. Sorry, I only heard the end of that. Oh, okay. So at the last meeting, many commissioners expressed interest in learning more about the new housing laws that were passed signed by the governor recently.
Yes, there were quite a few new laws passed. I'm sorry we didn't have time to prepare a presentation for you on them tonight. We'd be happy to do that at a future meeting. I will tell you that last night at the City Council, the City Attorney did provide a memo to the Council on those new laws, which is available on the website, or I'd be happy to just email it to you all. But there are some significant changes, the most significant probably being the restoration, finally, of inclusionary housing for rental housing, which is why our inclusionary housing ordinance that was going to be looked at by the council last night got pushed, because now we can require inclusionary rental housing. There's also some significant changes to the Housing Accountability Act, which mostly comes into play when you deny housing, so we haven't had to invoke it much here in the past, but it's come up occasionally. So there's some significant changes to that. But I'd be happy to give you a detailed presentation on all of them at some future meeting.
That'll all mean less work for the staff, right?
I'm not sure that's accurate.
Okay, so,
New
would,
pages to sign.
would it make sense to schedule a study session?
Certainly. At the next meeting.
Can you have an hour presentation for us?
I don't know if it'll take an hour or not, but we could certainly do that. The scheduling's a little tricky. At the next meeting, I'll be in Italy, and
Oh.
Ms. Fazeli will be in Barcelona.
Oh.
And Mr. Zazueta will be here. I don't think it's fair to foist on him all the housing laws in
And
his
I'll be,
first
and
meeting.
I'll be
New
gone
commissioner
too, so
be
I would prefer,
And I may be late too.
so I would prefer
no.
that we push it to the following.
Okay, so, I'm going to be presenting to the council on the it was like.
24th?
Yeah, thank you. And then I guess somebody will be the new commissioner will be appointed on 31st?
No, what they'll do is they'll open it up for, for the vacancy, and then take in applications, and then they will be referred back to the city council. Usually it's about 30 days, and then
Okay.
they'll do the interviews, and then they'll select somebody that evening. They do the interviews.
Oh, thank you. So maybe we can do this in early December?
Certainly, we could do the, is there a December 6th meeting, I believe? Is that correct? That's the first Wednesday in December.
Yes, it's on the 6th.
Okay, so
December
should we
6th.
just say 6 o'clock on December 6th? Does that
Yeah.
work for everybody?
I have a tentative conflict. I'll know whether or not it's resolved in a couple weeks. So let's say the 6th, but I might need to ask
Okay.
that it gets pushed to the 20th.
Daniel is here.
He'll be an expert by then.
Okay.
All right, so let's say the 6th unless I
6th
have to
then.
push to the
All
20th.
right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, anybody has anything to report? Okay. So as I said, I'm going to be presenting about the opening on the 24th. So please, if you know of anybody interested in applying, they're encouraged to apply. And if you have friends who are interested, please encourage them to apply. Okay. Upcoming agenda items that we need to, okay.
In particular.
City council actions.
Yes, Madam Chair. So last night, there was an appeal of the Planning Commission action denying the variance or minor modification at 725 Los Padres, or was it Las Palmas?
No.
Yeah,
Padres, I'm
that,
sorry.
It's
that,
Los Padres, yes.
that
it's-
accessory unit.
Yeah, Los Padres. So it ended up that the council did approve denied the action by the Planning Commission and did uphold the appeal. And so for that accessory unit, or actually it's accessory structure, it was not a habitable structure in terms of a living unit. So they did approve that.
So that means they got the variance?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And then as our attorney mentioned, the affordable housing ordinance, they didn't act on that. They actually requested to receive input from the ad hoc affordable housing working group and then return to council in light of those new housing regulations that are been approved by the governor. And just one other minor update is that the El Camino Real specific plan, since everyone's been asking, we finally have that contract executed, and there will be a kickoff meeting with the consultants on October 12th with, at least that's internally with the staff, and then there'll be a process to do the outreach shortly after that.
Who is that contractor?
It's Ramey and Associates.
Ray?
Ramey and Associates.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I just was wondering, are you saying that there's this housing working group, the ad hoc housing working group?
Yes.
Is that going to reconvene then?
Yes, they're going to reconstitute that
I see.
ad hoc committee.
I see, okay.
Yeah, just,
It
Well,
was,
they were charged with looking at, the nexus fees and the affordable housing fees and how those were applied, then the ratios, and also the, on-site or off-site, all the provisions related to inclusionary housing.
yeah, so I was on that working group, and it consisted of representatives from the developers, building industry, as well as affordable housing advocates, and some council members, and I was on that as the Planning Commission rep. And so it was to make a recommendation for what we were going to set the impact fees at for the Nexus study. So they did come up with some numbers, but then now that all these new housing laws have gone into effect, we need to revisit all those numbers.
Inclusionary rental piece?
Yeah.
Okay.
With regards to the, I was saying with regards to the early item about upcoming agenda items, there are 2 housing projects that'll be coming forward to you. 575 Benton Street, that was previously an Irvine project known as Mission Town Center. It's now a Prometheus project. They need to go before the planning, the Historical Landmarks Commission first. It's anticipated they will go this upcoming month, and then afterwards they'll have their recommendation for Planning Commission and Council. We're still working on the revisions to the drawings and other minor items that we're working through on that. So it may be a little bit later in the year and then such. Another one is Lawrence Station Area Plan. There are phase 2 parcels, and one of the project applicants is Summerhill, and we're working on 38 units. Yeah, but they have a map, they have to come back here.
What was that one at the corner?
The corner piece?
The odd piece?
No, the corner piece was a True Life, which is now basically controlled by Toll Brothers. It is a parcel to the north of that, off of Kiefer and Corbin. So it's immediate parcel to the north, between the fire station and the Toll Brothers project site that you had seen earlier.
So
That will involve this county's
Well,
expressway expansion, or?
no, that's on the other side. That's on the western side. This is on the eastern side on off of Kiefer and Corbin, along Calabasas Creek.
So they leveled the ground on the phase that we approved, but I don't see a lot of construction activity going on. Is that moving forward?
No, on Summerhill and Westlake Urban, it does take quite a bit of time to develop construction drawings. So after they obtain their approvals, they have to basically, get each of the product types in for approval. There's a lot of public works items that need to basically take place. They're moving forward. They'll probably go forward in a couple months to City Council on the final map. They have the tentative map that was approved as part of the project approval that you saw.
Okay, thank you.
So anything,
Okay, Commissioner Chahal.
anything important in the next meeting? 25th October, upcoming, real upcoming?
I can let you know. The only thing I'm aware of is doggy daycare. And it's very upscale doggy daycare, so.
Another one?
There will be an ordinance on recreational marijuana. Yeah.
That comes fast?
Yes, you will be making a recommendation to the city council. Basically, it's just pushing the issue down a few months. We're going to impose a temporary ban while we have time to get a consultant on board to recommend some appropriate regulations. So it's a fairly simple ordinance. It just says,
Kind of like the massage.
hold everything for a few months until we get this consultant on board and can recommend some appropriate regulations.
Are those regulations for sale or for use?
Sale.
You will find out.
Because I believe Sunnyvale banned all, even medical marijuana.
Oh, there's a
sale.
variety of responses, certainly, in every city. But we will also have Senior Deputy City Attorney Sue Reuter here. She's been working on drafting the ordinance and the new regulations to come. So you'll actually have 2 attorneys for the price of 1 next time.
What price is that?
Okay.
The overtime price, huh?
Right, okay. Anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn? Well, somebody.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much. So this is our last meeting, Gloria?
Gloria?
Oh, okay.
We're not gonna have. Take a picture. We're not gonna.
Okay, let's take a picture.
On Friday. As a consultant.
Double dipping.
Where's my phone? Where's my phone? Left my phone at home.
Brandon, take a picture with Gloria. We'll take a picture with Gloria.